hall was already full when Lena Voss arrived. She had not wanted to come. She had told herself she would not come. She had even packed a small bag the night before. Bread, a water flask, an old compass that no longer pointed true, with the vague idea that she could walk east before dawn and simply miss the whole thing. But the village elder had knocked on her door at 5 in the morning, and behind him stood 2 council guards who were not unkind but were not optional either, and so here she was. The fate ceremony happened once a year, at the end of the cold season, when the moon hung low and orange over the Ashford Mountains like a lantern someone had forgotten to put out. Every unmated wolf in the kingdom was required to attend. That was the law. It had been the law for 300 years. Lena had attended every year since she turned 18, and every year she had stood in the back near the stone pillar that smelled of old candle smoke, and every year nothing had happened, and every year she had walked home before the closing rites and made herself a cup of tea and gone to sleep. She was 22 now. She told herself this year would be no different. The Hall of Ashford Keep was enormous. It had been built during a time when people believed that large buildings made large men, and the ceiling rose so high above the stone floor that in winter the heat never reached it, and in summer the cold never left it. Candles lined every wall in iron brackets, hundreds of them, and their light made everything look gold and a little bit unreal, the way a photograph looks when it has been kept too long in a drawer. People filled the floor in neat groupings, sorted by pack and territory. Lena had no pack. She stood near the back, beside a woman named Clara who was 34 and had attended 12 of these ceremonies and held the particular stillness of someone who had long ago made peace with disappointment. They did not speak much. Clara offered her a piece of dried apple from her coat pocket, and Lena accepted it. "They say he is attending this year," Clara said, looking straight ahead. Lena did not ask who. There was only one he that mattered at a ceremony like this. King Caelan Ashford, 28 years old. The Alpha King of all the wolf territories, from the eastern salt flats to the western ridge forests. He had ruled for 6 years, since his father's death. And in those 6 years he had not mated, had not come close to mating, had attended none of the fate ceremonies because the law that required attendance did not apply to the king. The king could take a mate through treaty, or through choice, or through ceremony, but the ceremony could not compel him. Why would he come? Lena asked. Clara shrugged. Politics. The Eastern lords are pressing. They want a treaty sealed with a bloodline bond, and for that he needs a mate. She paused. Or maybe he is finally ready. Lena finished the dried apple and said nothing. At 7 o'clock, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened, and King Caelan Ashford walked in. Lena had seen him before, the way you see anyone in power. On announcements, on the seals of official documents, once at a distance during a territory procession when she had been 16 and had climbed a market stall post to see over the crowd. He had been a dark shape on a dark horse then, moving too fast for a proper look. He was not a dark shape now. He was tall, not in a way that felt like a performance, but in the way a very old tree is tall, like it simply could not have been any other size. He wore the dark uniform of the Ashford line, no decorations except the silver wolf crest at his collar, and he moved through the parting crowd the way water moves around stone, without effort, without acknowledgement. His face was composed, not cold exactly, but arranged, like a man who had decided very carefully what to show and was showing only that. Behind him came his advisors and his head guard. Beside him walked Lord Finn, the senior court official, who always looked slightly out of breath. The ceremony began. There was music first, old pack songs played on instruments that were older than the hall, and then a ritual address from the High Elder, an ancient man named Prentice who had performed this ceremony for 40 years, and who Lena suspected had memorized the words so long ago that he no longer actually heard them as he spoke. He talked about the bond between wolves, about the thread that fate wove between one soul and another, about the rightness of the pairing, and the peace that came from accepting it. Lena watched the candles. Then the music changed. Slower, lower. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly. This was the part that mattered, the part where the ceremony stopped being a ritual and started being something else. It was different for everyone. Some people felt nothing, year after year. Some felt a warmth, a pull, like a hand pressed against their chest from the inside. Some heard a sound that no one else could hear. The old story said that fate used whatever language a person could understand. Lena had felt nothing for 4 years. This year she felt it the moment the music changed. It was not warmth. It was not sound. It was more like a line had been drawn from the center of her chest to a point across the room, and every part of her that was wolf, the deep animal part that lived beneath her thoughts and her choices and her ordinary days, turned toward that point like a compass needle turning north. She did not want to look. She looked anyway. Across the enormous hall, past 200 people who were all caught in their own version of this moment, King Kalen Ashford was looking directly at her. Their eyes met. Something inside Lena went very still. Something inside him lurched forward. She could see it happen. It was in his jaw, in the line of his shoulders, in the sudden tension of his hands. Whatever lived in him that was Wolf had recognized what she was, and it had moved toward her without asking his permission first, and the whole court could see it. Lord Fen, standing at Kalen's shoulder, turned to look at what the king was looking at. Lena watched Lord Fen's face go through several expressions in quick succession, ending on something she could not quite name. The music stopped. The hall went very quiet. Kalen Ashford walked toward her. She did not run, though something in her body wanted to. She stood her ground the way she had learned to stand her ground, which was a skill that had taken her a long time to develop and which she valued more than most things she owned. Clara beside her made a very small sound and took one careful step to the side. He stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, he was more complicated than distance made him. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that did not come from laughter. His jaw was set, but not in anger, in something harder than anger, something that had been practiced until it felt like a natural position. His eyes were gray-green, the color of the forest in winter, and they were looking at her with an intensity that she felt like pressure against her skin. He did not say hello. He did not say anything for a moment. The thread between them, she could feel it now, bright and taut and entirely unwelcome, pulled at her sternum like something living. "Lena Voss," he said. His voice was even, controlled. He had done his homework. Omega-born, outer ward. A pause. Daughter of Sira Voss. Something in her chest moved at her mother's name. She made sure it did not reach her face. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for another long moment. She did not drop her gaze. Then he said, "I reject you." 3 words. Simple words. Words that every wolf in the territory knew, because they were the formal words, the ritual words, the words that completed a rejection bond. They were not casual. They were not improvised. You did not say those words by accident. He had said them the moment he arrived at her. Before any other word, before any greeting or acknowledgement, or even a breath of acknowledgement, that what existed between them was real. He had walked across a room full of 200 witnesses, had said her name and her lineage, and had rejected her in the same breath. The hall made a sound. It was not a gasp. It was something more careful than that, a collective intake of air that people then held, because letting it out might make noise, and making noise might draw attention, and attention in this moment was the last thing anyone wanted to claim. Clara had gone absolutely still beside her. Lena looked at Kalen Ashford's face. He met her eyes steadily. He was not embarrassed. He was not apologetic. He was waiting. For the response. For the words that would make the rejection formal and complete. For the other half of the ritual that he had already started. She understood something in that moment. He had been prepared. He had known this might happen, that the bond might appear, that they might be matched. He had made a decision before he walked into the hall tonight. He had prepared his response. He had stood here and looked at her, at the girl from the outer ward, at the daughter of a disgraced Omega, at someone who was not politically useful, not strategically valuable, not the mate that an Alpha King needed, and he had not hesitated. 3 words. Lena breathed in. She knew the formal response. Every wolf did. You learned it the way you learned your name, not in a classroom, but by absorption, by hearing it said in stories and ceremonies, and the low voices of older wolves who talked about such things at night. "I accept your rejection," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. She held his gaze for one more second, long enough to make it clear that she was not looking away first because she was afraid, but because she was done, and then she turned and walked toward the door. She moved at a steady pace, not rushing, not slow. The crowd parted for her. Not out of respect exactly, but out of the specific discomfort people feel when they witness something that they will be talking about for years and do not yet know what to say about it. She did not look back. She reached the great door of the hall, pushed it open, and stepped into the cold night air, and then she was outside and the door was closed behind her, and the sound of the ceremony was muffled and distant. She stood on the stone steps for a moment. The moon was still there, still orange, still hanging low. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky. She put her hand flat against her sternum, against the place where the thread had been bright and taut, and she held it there. It was still there. The thread. It had not snapped the way it was supposed to. Rejection bonds worked like a cut, clean, immediate, done. You said the words, the other person said the words, and the connection between you severed and healed over like any other wound. It was supposed to hurt and then be finished. This was not finished. It was fraying, like something that had been pulled too hard at both ends and was loosening in the middle without actually breaking, not severed, not whole, something else entirely. Lena had never heard of this happening. She lowered her hand. She had practice at this particular kind of leaving. She put one foot in front of the other and began walking home through the cold, and the moon kept its orange light over everything, indifferent and steady, the way moons have always been. Behind her, in the hall, no one spoke for a long moment. And King Kalen Ashford stood exactly where she had left him, in the middle of the floor, surrounded by 200 witnesses, and his wolf, the deep animal part of him that lived beneath his composure and his calculations, and his 6 years of careful rule, was pressed against the inside of his ribs like it wanted out. He did not let it out. He turned back to the front of the hall. He nodded at Lord Fen. He indicated, with a small gesture, that the ceremony should continue. Lord Fen stared at him for a moment. Then Lord Fen turned to the High Elder Prentice and nodded, and the old man began to speak again, and the music started up, and the ceremony moved forward because ceremonies always moved forward. But in the third row from the back, an elderly Omega woman named Greta, who had attended 41 of these ceremonies and who had seen things in this hall that she had told no one, watched the door that Lena Voss had just walked through and covered her mouth with one hand. She sat like that for a long time, because she had seen the rejection, and she had also seen what happened to the thread. And she knew, the way old wolves know things, in the bones and the gut and the deep animal memory that goes back further than any written law, that what had happened tonight was not finished. It was, in fact, barely begun. The cold season had 5 more weeks in it. The Eastern Lords were already sending messengers. The mountains stood in their old patient rows against the sky, and the moon hung over all of it, orange as a coal, warm as a lie. Lena Voss walked home through the dark. She made herself a cup of tea. She went to sleep. She did not cry, because she had decided a long time ago that certain things did not deserve her tears, and public rejection by a man who had prepared for it in advance was one of those things. In the morning, she went to work. She kept the records for the outer ward, birth logs, land rights, dispute records, the kind of paperwork that no one important ever wanted to touch. She was good at it. She liked the order of it, the way a column of numbers would always add up the same no matter how many times you checked, the way a name written in ink would always stay where you put it. She sat at her desk. She opened the ledger. She wrote the date at the top of a new page in her careful, even handwriting. And she did not think about the gray-green eyes of Kalen Ashford, or the 3 words he had said before he knew anything about her, or the thread between them that had not broken the way it should have. She did not think about any of it. She was very good at not thinking about things. She had been practicing since she was 7 years old. That was the year her mother had disappeared from the outer ward, quietly and officially, her name struck from the record rolls, her cottage reassigned, her belongings distributed to the community stores, as if she had never been anything more than a collection of objects that needed sorting. The officials who came to the door had used words like relocation and administrative reassignment, which were words that meant nothing and were designed to mean nothing. And the 7-year-old Lena had stood in the doorway of the cottage and looked at the official who was explaining this, and had understood, with the particular clarity that children sometimes have when adults are lying, that she was being told a story instead of the truth. She had not cried then either. She had nodded and thanked the official and closed the door and sat down on the floor of the empty cottage and stayed very still for a long time. Then she had gotten up and started figuring out how to live. 15 years later, she was still figuring it out, and she was getting better at it all the time. She wrote 3 lines in the ledger, corrected a numerical error from the day before, added a new birth record for a family in the eastern part of the ward, filed a land dispute note. The morning moved around her, steady and ordinary. She had nearly convinced herself it was going to stay that way. Then the message arrived. It was delivered by a palace runner, a young man in the gray and silver of the Ashford house, who knocked on the door of the record office with the careful formality of someone who had been told exactly how to deliver this and did not want to get it wrong. Lena took the folded note and read it. It was brief, 7 lines, official language precise and impersonal. It informed her that the palace archive required a temporary archivist to assist with a cataloging project of significant scope. Her name had been selected from the outer ward rolls on the basis of her record-keeping experience and her demonstrated accuracy. The position would begin in 1 week. The duration was unspecified but expected to be brief. She would be housed in the servants' quarters and compensated at the standard rate for skilled administrative work. At the bottom, in a different hand, smaller, tighter, like someone writing quickly, were 4 additional words. "You will come, Ashford." She read those 4 words twice. Then she folded the note very neatly along its original crease and set it on her desk. The runner was still standing in the doorway, watching her with the expression of a man who had been told to wait for an answer. Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the ledger in front of her. Then she looked back at the note. She picked up her pen. At the bottom of the note, beneath the 4 words, she wrote 2 of her own. "I know." She handed it back to the runner. He looked at it, looked at her, decided this was above his pay grade to interpret, tucked it carefully into his satchel and left. Lena went back to the ledger. 1 week. She had 1 week to figure out what, exactly, King Kalen Ashford wanted, with a rejected mate and a record keeper, and whether it was the kind of thing she could survive. She had figured out harder problems. She turned the page. She kept working. The wolf would not hunt. Kalen discovered this 3 days after the ceremony, in the gray early morning when he went to the Eastern training ground alone, the way he always did when he needed to think without anyone watching him think. The training ground was a wide field of packed earth surrounded by old pines, far enough from the keep that the smell of the kitchens and the noise of the court did not reach it. He came here before the rest of the household was awake. He ran the drills alone. He let himself be wolf for an hour before the day required him to be king. Except that morning, his wolf sat down in the center of the field and refused to move. It was not injured. It was not ill. It was, as far as Kalen could tell, entirely healthy and entirely uninterested in doing anything that involved running or tracking, or any of the things that should have come naturally on a cold morning in open ground. It sat in the frost-browned grass and looked at the tree line and seemed, in some complicated animal way, to be waiting. For something. Or someone. Kalen stood in human form at the edge of the field and looked at his wolf, and his wolf did not look back. "Get up," he said. The wolf lay down. He went back inside. He told himself it would pass. Wolves had moods, the same as people. He had heard of wolves who refused to hunt after the death of a packmate, after a territory loss, after a long illness. The body kept its own records, and sometimes those records disagreed with what the mind had decided. It would pass. It did not pass. By the end of the first week, 3 things had changed. His wolf refused the hunt. It refused to respond to the court wolves, the trained animals that accompanied the palace guard, in the usual ways. And when Lady Mira of the Northern Pack arrived for what Lord Fen had carefully scheduled as an informal introduction visit, his wolf walked out of the meeting chamber, and would not re-enter it. Lady Mira was well suited for what Kalen needed. She came from a strong bloodline, had been educated in territory law and treaty protocol, was respected within her pack and known outside it. She was not someone you could object to on any reasonable grounds. She was, by every measure Kalen had used for 6 years to evaluate political decisions, an excellent choice. His wolf disagreed. Not in a dramatic way. It did not make noise or cause disruption. It simply withdrew. It went to the back of him, to the quiet animal corner where it usually waited, and it turned its face to the wall and stopped participating. Kalen had never had to drag his wolf anywhere before. It was an unsettling experience. Meanwhile, in the outer ward, Lena Voss was packing a small bag. She packed practically 2 changes of working clothes, plain, dark, washable. Her reference texts on cataloging and archive classification, the small knife she kept in her boot that she had never used and hoped she would never use but had carried since she was 14, when the outer ward had been less safe than it was now and her cottage had no lock. Her notebook. She did not pack the compass that no longer pointed true. She arrived at the palace on a Tuesday morning, in the kind of thin, clear winter light that makes everything look slightly sharper than it is. The palace runner who had delivered the message was waiting at the Eastern Service entrance and escorted her without conversation to a small room on the 4th floor of the West Wing, which contained a narrow bed, a writing table, a window that looked onto the inner courtyard, and nothing else. "The archive is on the 3rd floor, the runner said. Lord Fen will brief you tomorrow." "When do I begin?" Lena asked. "When Lord Fen briefs you." "When does Lord Fen brief me?" "Tomorrow," the runner said, and left. Lena put her bag down on the narrow bed. She looked at the window. The inner courtyard below was a square of gray stone with a fountain at the center that was not running in the cold season. 3 palace guards crossed it at measured intervals. A tabby cat sat on the fountain's edge and watched the guards with the specific disdain of an animal that has never been impressed by authority. Lena watched the cat. The cat did not look up. She went to bed early and slept without dreaming, which she considered a reasonable start. The briefing from Lord Fenn took place in a small side room off the main corridor. Fenn was a man of about 50 with a neat gray beard, and the manner of someone who was always managing 4 different problems simultaneously and had learned to seem calm about it. He laid out the archive project in clear, organized terms. There was a backlog of historical records going back 2 decades that needed to be cross-referenced, categorized, and indexed. It was detailed work. It required precision and patience, and a good eye for inconsistency. Lena had all 3. The archive room is on the 3rd floor, Fenn said. It is accessible from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. The records are organized by year, then by territory, then by category. Your access clearance covers everything in sections A through F. You do not have clearance for section G. What is in section G? Lena asked. Fenn looked at her. Section G, he said carefully, is not part of your project. Understood, Lena said. She began work that afternoon. The archive was a long, narrow room with shelves from floor to ceiling and 2 large tables in the center with good lamps. It smelled of old paper and the particular cold that settles into rooms that are kept climate-controlled rather than heated. Lena put on her second sweater, positioned the best lamp, and started at the beginning. She was methodical about it. She created an inventory system in the first 2 hours, a cross-reference index on loose sheets that she kept updated as she moved through the shelves. She found the first major inconsistency on the second day, a gap in the Northern Territory records from 14 years ago, where 3 complete years of birth and death records were simply missing, replaced by a single notation that read, Consolidated Archive, see Central Ledger. There was no central ledger in sections A through F. She noted it in her index and moved on. On the 4th night, she was still in the archive at 8 o'clock, working by lamplight, when she heard someone open the door. She did not look up from the page she was cataloging. The archive closes at 9, she said. I still have an hour. A pause. I am aware, said a voice that was not a secretary's voice or a guard's voice or Lord Fenn's voice. It was a voice she had heard in a very large hall, saying her name and her lineage, and 3 words she would not forget. She looked up. Kalen Ashford was standing in the doorway of his own archive, at 8 o'clock at night, in an ordinary dark jacket with no crest on the collar, and he was looking at the cross-reference index she had built on the table between them, as if it had personally surprised him. She put her pen down, folded her hands, waited. He looked at the index, then at her, then at the index again. You have been here 4 days, he said. Yes. You built this in 4 days. She glanced at the index. It is not finished. The structure is built. The content is about 30% complete. He came into the room. He picked up the top sheet of the index and looked at it. She watched him read it. The real reading, not the skimming that powerful people usually did with documents when they wanted to seem interested. He was actually reading it. He set it down. Section G, he said. I was told I did not have clearance, she said. You were. I have not attempted to access it. He looked at her. I know, I checked. She said nothing. He pulled back the chair on the other side of the table and sat down. It was a very ordinary thing to do, just a man sitting at a table. And yet it was not ordinary, because he was not an ordinary man, and this was not an ordinary situation, and they both knew it. The bond did not sever, he said. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather, not as a confession, not as an apology, just information. Lena looked at him. I am aware, she said, using his own words back at him. Something moved in his face, not quite amusement, but the shape of what amusement might grow into if given enough time. You felt it. It would be difficult not to. He leaned back in the chair. His posture was controlled even in private, she noticed. The posture of a man who had been observed for long enough that control had become his natural position. My advisors tell me that a rejection that fails to sever is extremely rare. There are perhaps 40 documented cases in 3 centuries of records. I did not know that, she said. Neither did I, until 4 days ago. She waited. The legal consequence, he continued, is that I am, in the view of pack law, still bonded, in a provisional state. The bond can be completed, or it can be formally dissolved through a second ceremony, but a second ceremony requires both parties, and it requires a high elder present, and it cannot happen for at least 60 days from the original rejection. Lena thought about this. And the treaty with the Eastern Lords, she said slowly. The one that requires a mating bond to be sealed. He looked at her. You know about that. Lord Fen does not speak quietly. A pause. The treaty cannot be sealed until my mating status is resolved, he said, which means for 60 days, at minimum. I am in a position that I did not choose and cannot immediately undo. She folded her hands again. And the archivist position. I needed you where I could. He stopped. Started again. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. It was the most honest thing he had said. She could tell it cost him something, even though the words themselves were impersonal. So you brought me to your palace, she said, to observe me. Yes. She nodded slowly. And what have you observed? In 4 days? He looked at the index on the table between them. That you are extremely good at your job, he said. That you work 12-hour days without complaint. That you found the Northern Territory record gap on your second day, and have been tracking gaps throughout sections A through C. That you eat lunch at your desk and have not used the common room once. He paused. And that you have not once tried to access section G. You told me not to. Other people have been told not to, and have tried anyway. She looked at him steadily. I am not other people. Silence. Outside the archive window, the palace bells rang the half-hour. 8:30. One of the guards crossed the inner courtyard below, his footsteps muffled by the closed window. Something shifted in the air of the room, not dramatically, not obviously, just a small movement, like the moment before a change in weather, when the air becomes aware of itself. She felt the thread between them, frayed, stubborn, refusing to be gone. She suspected he felt it too, because his jaw had done the thing she had seen in the ceremony hall, that slight tightening that meant something inside him was pressing forward. He stood up. The position is real, he said. The work is real. You will complete the cataloging project, and you will be paid for it, and you will be housed and fed at palace standard for the duration. He straightened his jacket. I am not asking you to be anything other than what you are. What am I? She asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. He looked at her for a moment. An archivist, he said. He left. She sat at the table for a while after he was gone, looking at the index she had built and the lamp that was burning steadily, and the window that showed the dark courtyard and the pale winter sky above it. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. In the morning, she woke at 5, dressed, and went to the archive. She worked through sections C and D before anyone else in the palace was fully awake. She found 3 more record gaps, noted them in the index, continued. By the time Lord Fen appeared at 9 o'clock to check her progress, she had reorganized an entire shelf of misfiled Northern Territory documents and begun on the Eastern Rim records. Lord Fen looked at the reorganized shelf and then looked at her, and then looked at the shelf again. How? He said. The misfiling was systematic, she said. Someone had been filing by territory code rather than by date within territory. Once I recognized the pattern, it was straightforward to correct. Fen looked at the shelf a third time. That error has been in the system for 11 years. 12. She said. The misfiling started in the 4th year of the previous archivist's tenure. I found the handwriting change. Lord Fen was quiet for a moment. Miss Voss, he said. Do you have any interest in a more permanent position? She looked at him. I am here for the cataloging project, she said. As specified. He nodded. He left. She went back to work. That afternoon, Lady Mira of the Northern Pack arrived for her formal introduction visit, and the east wing of the palace became noticeably more fragrant with expensive perfume, and noticeably noisier with the controlled activity of important visitors being correctly managed. Lena heard it distantly, from the archive, and paid it no particular attention. She did notice, at about 4 o'clock, when she went to the corridor water basin to refill her flask, that there was a commotion of a different kind near the base of the west staircase. A young footman was explaining something in an urgent undertone to Lord Fen, and Fen's face had the expression of a man receiving news that he had expected but had hoped to avoid. She filled her flask and went back to the archive. She learned, from the kitchen girl who brought her evening tray, that the king had stood outside the meeting chamber for the better part of 15 minutes before entering, and had spent the meeting looking out the window, and had left at the earliest opportunity. She ate her dinner. She went back to the index. At 8:45, she began closing up the archive, capping the ink, stacking the sorted files, extinguishing all but one lamp. She was putting on her coat when she realized that for the second night in a row, she had been the last person in the room. She was not sure what to make of that. She walked upstairs to her small room with its window over the courtyard and its narrow bed. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. Across the courtyard on the second floor of the opposite wing, a light was on. One window, lit amber. She could see the shape of a man standing at it, not moving, looking out. She looked away first. She got into bed. She lay in the dark for a while, listening to the palace settle around her, the shift change of the guards, the distant sound of the kitchen being cleaned, the wind against the glass. The thread was still there, still frayed, still present, still refusing to be done. She closed her eyes. She thought about Section G. She thought about the Northern Territory record gap. She thought about her mother's name, which she had not spoken aloud since she was 7 years old, and which lived in her chest like a stone that she had gotten so used to carrying that she no longer noticed its weight most days. She fell asleep. In the morning, the light in the opposite window was gone, and the courtyard was empty, and the day began again exactly as it had before, ordinary and careful and pointed straight ahead. She thought about what Lord Fenn had almost said, that the king needed to understand what he was dealing with, and she turned it over in her mind the way she turned over problem entries in the ledger, looking for the angle that made it resolve. She had been brought here to be observed, but she had also been brought here because the bond had not broken, and because 60 days was a long time to be in a provisional state, and because somewhere in this palace was a Section G that no one had given her access to, and somewhere in the Eastern Territory was a lord named Doran, who was watching the king's mating status, the way a crow watches a wounded thing from a fence post. She was very good at understanding systems. She was beginning to understand this one. She sharpened her pen and began a new page in the index. 2 weeks into her palace posting, Lena found the record she was not supposed to find. It was a Tuesday, early morning, the kind of cold that got into the stone of the building and stayed there all day regardless of the fireplaces. She had been working her way methodically through the Eastern Rim section, and she had reached a subsection labeled Administrative Correspondence, which was exactly as tedious as it sounded, and which she had been putting off in favor of the more interesting territory records. But tedious work still needed to be done, and she had promised herself she would not skip sections. She opened a folder dated 31 years ago. At first it looked ordinary. Routine correspondence between the palace and 3 eastern border outposts. Supply requests, weather reports, a seasonal roster. She was scanning rather than reading, looking for the categorization tags she needed for the index, and she almost missed it. A single page, different paper from the rest, thicker, older in feel. A letter, handwritten, with the seal of the previous Alpha King at the top. She read it. She read it again. Then she sat very still for a moment with the letter in her hands and the lamp casting its steady light across the room, and the palace quiet around her, and the cold in the stones. The letter was about a woman. The woman had been an Omega from the Northern Territory. She had been mated, a provisional bond, the same kind Lena now had with Kaelin, the kind that forms at the fate ceremony and can be confirmed or rejected. The Alpha involved had chosen rejection, but the rejection in this case had been followed by something else, a formal recharacterization. The woman's pack status had been reviewed. Her history had been examined, and a committee, composed of 3 court officials, all of them named in the letter, had determined that the rejection had occurred because the woman's lineage was irregular, her Omega status was questionable, and her presence at the fate ceremony had been irregular in nature. They had, in the language of the letter, corrected the record. The woman's name, in the letter, was Sierra Voss. Lena sat with this for a long moment. Her mother had not been disgraced. Her mother had been mated to an Alpha, not just any Alpha, but a man of court, a man of rank, and he had rejected her, and rather than let that stand in the record as what it was, the court had written a different story. A story in which the problem was not the Alpha's choice, but the woman's origins. Her mother had not been disgraced. She had been erased. 3 names were on the letter. One she did not recognize. One was Lord Fenn, the current Lord Fenn's predecessor, his father, who had apparently held the same position. And the third name, with the handwriting that confirmed his authority, was the previous Alpha King, not Kaelin. Kaelin had been approximately 2 years old when this letter was written. She closed the folder. She put it back in its place on the shelf. She sat at the table for a while and looked at the lamp. The thing was, she had suspected something like this, not the specifics, not the letter, not the names, but she had suspected, in the way that you suspect the shape of a room before someone turns on the light, that her mother's story was not what the official record said it was. The official record said, irregular conduct. The official record said, voluntary removal from pack registry. The official record said, no further information. Official records, in Lena's professional experience, were most suspicious when they were most definite. She picked up her pen. She made no note of the letter in the index. She continued cataloging. She was very good at deciding what to carry, and when to put it down, and how to hold something privately until the right moment to set it in front of the right person. She had been doing this for 15 years. She could do it for a while longer. The days continued. She did not speak about the letter. She filed it correctly in the administrative correspondence section. That was her job, and the job needed to be done. And she continued through the subsection and moved on to the next one. She worked. She ate at her desk. She refilled her flask at the corridor basin. She went to bed. She did not use the common room. She had looked in on the common room on her third day, out of curiosity. It was a comfortable space, a long table, several chairs, a fire, a few palace staff who had been at Ashford Keep long enough to have developed the specific ease of people who know their place in a household and are content with it. They had been polite to her. They had offered her tea. She had taken the tea and stayed for 12 minutes and then returned to the archive. The problem with common rooms was that they required a kind of softness she was not ready for. Not the softness of weakness, but the softness of allowing people in. She had not allowed people in for a long time, and she had her reasons, and the reasons were still good. Still, she noticed things. She noticed that the kitchen staff left a slightly larger portion of food on her evening tray after the first week. Not much, but enough. She noticed that the young footman who brought the breakfast basket had taken to leaving it on her table rather than on the floor outside the door, which meant he was going a little out of his way. She noticed that Clara from the outer ward had sent a message to her room, just a short note, 3 lines, asking how she was managing, and including a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a recipe for a tea that Clara claimed cured cold floor feet. She did not write back right away. She wrote back on Sunday. And then there was Kalen. She saw him in the archive 3 times in the second week, each time at night. He came in the way he had the first time, without announcement, in ordinary clothes, alone. He did not come to bother her, he came to read. He would take a file or two from a shelf, his own files, from the deeper sections, past her clearance area, and sit at the far end of the table and work through them in silence. The first time she had waited for him to say something. He had not said anything. She had continued working, so had he. After an hour he had put the files back and left. The second time she was already settled in her chair by the time he arrived. She did not look up. He took his section of the table and she kept hers, and the archive was quiet around them, except for the sound of pages turning and the distant winter wind against the stone. The third time, at about 8 in the evening, she reached for her flask and found it empty. She got up to go to the corridor basin. As she passed the far end of the table, she could see what he was reading. A treaty document, dense and formal, with territorial maps clipped to the side. She came back with her refilled flask and did not say anything about what she had seen. But he looked up as she sat down. "The border survey in Section D," he said. "Did you find anything inconsistent?" She thought about it. 2 survey notations from 12 years ago conflict with the boundary markers documented 15 years ago. The difference is small, about 40 meters of ridgeline, but it is there. He nodded slowly. "Which documentation year is correct?" "The older one," she said. "The newer notation uses measurement language that was standardized by the Eastern Survey Guild, but the Guild did not operate in the northern ridge areas until 10 years ago. Someone used the new language to describe an old document. It is either a clerical error or an intentional change." He was quiet for a moment. "An intentional change. Probably," she said. "A 40-meter change in ridgeline at that location shifts the water rights on the Fen Creek tributary." He looked at her for a moment. "You know what the Fen Creek tributary rights mean," he said. It was not a question. "Lord Doran of the Eastern Wastes has been disputing those rights for 8 years, she said. "The dispute is referenced in 3 different territorial summaries in Section B. The survey discrepancy would, if it were accepted as the accurate record, give the tributary rights to the Eastern claim." He put the treaty document down on the table. He looked at her the way he had looked at the cross-reference index on her first week. The real looking, the actual attention. She held it without difficulty. She had been holding the attention of people who did not quite know what to make of her for most of her life, and she had learned to be still in it. "How long ago did you find the discrepancy?" he asked. 8 days. "You did not report it." "I noted it in the index. You have access to the index." He picked up the index she had built and turned to the relevant page. Found the entry. "Read it." She had written it in the same plain, precise language she used for everything else. No editorializing, no emphasis, just the facts laid out in order. He set the index down. "Miss Voss," he said, "who do you trust?" The question came out of the usual conversation like a stone dropped into still water. She looked at him. That is not a usual question, she said. No, he agreed. She thought about it seriously, which she suspected was what he wanted. Very few people, she said. Clara, my former supervisor at the Outer Ward Record Office, who retired 2 years ago. A woman named Greta, who has been kind to me at the fate ceremony for several years. He nodded. Anyone in this palace? He asked. She thought about the kitchen staff with the larger portions, the footman with the breakfast basket, the recipe for cold floor tea. Not yet, she said. The not yet was deliberate. She watched him hear it. He picked up his treaty document. There is a meeting of the Eastern Territory Lords in 4 days, he said. Lord Doran will be present. The Fen Creek tributary rights will be on the agenda. And the survey discrepancy? The survey discrepancy is a problem, he said. If Doran's people have already found it, and they may have, they will use it. If they have not found it, I need to correct it before they do. And I need to do it in a way that cannot be challenged. She understood. You need a clean, documented correction, formally filed with a full audit trail, so that if he raises it, the corrected record is already official and the error is already attributed. Yes, I can do that, she said. It will take 2 days, working quickly. He nodded. She went back to her page. After a moment, he went back to his. They worked in silence until the 8:30 bell, when she began her closing routine, and he put his files back in their place. He was at the door when she said, without looking up from the lamp she was trimming, the water rights case. It goes back further than 8 years. He paused. I know, he said. The original boundary agreement was written 31 years ago, she said. The same year as the Administrative Correspondence Review in Section C. Silence. She kept her eyes on the lamp. The Section C review that covers Northern Territory administrative matters from that period, she continued, in the same level voice she used for everything. There is a file in that section that I catalogued correctly and noted in the index. More silence. The lamp was trimmed. She capped the oil. There are 3 names on a letter in that file, she said. She heard him breathe. I have not altered the file, she said. I have not removed it or copied it. It is where it belongs, correctly filed, but I thought you should know it exists. She picked up her coat. Good night. She walked past him to the door. He did not stop her. She went upstairs to her room and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time. She had done something risky tonight, and she knew it. She had shown him the edge of what she knew. Not all of it, not the name that was in that file, not the personal fact that the name was her mother's, and she had left it open for him to examine. She was not afraid of what he would find. She was afraid of what she would feel when he found it. She looked at the window. The light was on in the opposite wing again. She got into bed. She pulled the blanket up. She made herself breathe evenly, in and out, until the tightness in her chest eased enough for her to sleep. It took longer than usual. In the morning, the survey correction work was on her desk. Someone had brought the relevant files from Section D and left them stacked neatly with a note in a handwriting she recognized, not Lord Fenn's, not the runner's, that said, "Take the time it needs." She sat down. She put on her sweater. She got to work. She completed the survey correction in 1 day and 16 hours, working through the night on the second day, stopping twice. Once to eat the cold dinner the kitchen staff had left covered on the side table, once to stretch her back against the stone wall of the archive for 3 minutes before sitting down again. When she filed the corrected record, she did not tell anyone immediately. She made the entry in the index, noted the correction with full documentation, original error, nature of discrepancy, method of verification, date of correction, and then she put the survey files back on the shelf in their proper order and went to the corridor basin and splashed cold water on her face. The Eastern Territory Lords arrived 2 days later. She saw them from the archive window, a group of 8 men crossing the inner courtyard in the mid-morning, moving with the particular walk of men who considered themselves important and wanted the architecture to confirm it. Lord Doran was at the front. She knew him by the way. You know someone you have heard described many times, tall, lean, with a way of holding his head slightly tilted, as if he were always deciding whether whatever he was looking at was worth his time. He looked up at the window as he crossed the courtyard. She was not sure if he could see her through the cold glass from that distance. She did not move back. He looked away and continued walking. The meeting was in the East Hall. Lena was not invited. She was not expected to be invited. She was an archivist, not a council member, and the internal workings of territorial lord meetings were not in her professional scope. She worked. At noon, Lord Fenn came to the archive looking slightly less composed than usual. The survey correction, he said. I need to see the documentation. She handed him the full audit file she had prepared. He took it, spent 4 minutes reading it. Then he looked at her over the top of the file. You worked through the night, he said. The timeline was appropriate, she said. He kept looking at her. The correction will be formally entered into the official territorial record this afternoon, before the meeting resumes. It will stand as the accurate document of record. He paused. Lord Doran raised the discrepancy in the first session this morning. He had a copy of the original survey with the incorrect notation. She nodded. She had assumed something like this. The correction was already filed, Fenn said. The error was already attributed. His documentation is now secondary to the corrected official record. He paused again. By 4 hours. The timeline was appropriate, she said again. Lord Fenn looked at the file in his hands. Miss Voss, he said, for the second time in her stay. Are you certain you would not consider a more permanent position? This time she did not answer immediately. She looked at the shelves around her, the reorganized files, the cleaned-up sections, the index that was now 60% complete and had already identified 11 significant gaps and 4 deliberate alterations in the official record. 11 gaps, 4 alterations, and 1 letter in the administrative correspondence subsection of the Eastern Rim records, filed correctly, noted plainly, carrying a name that had been struck from every other document in this building. She looked back at Fenn. Let me finish the current project, she said. Then we can discuss what comes next. He nodded. He left. She went back to work. At 5 o'clock, when the archive light was gold from the lamps and the winter dark had settled fully outside the window, the door opened and Kalen came in. He stood at the door for a moment, which was not usual. He usually came in immediately. Then he came to the table, and he sat down in the chair he always sat in, on his side of the table, and he looked at her. It worked, he said. Good, she said. Doran was... He stopped. He was trying to find a word. She watched him not find it. Contained, he said finally. He was contained. He had expected to have a stronger position. He may find another one, she said. He did not come to this meeting without preparation. One survey discrepancy is not a full strategy. Kalen nodded. He knew this. She could see he knew it. The boundary agreement from 31 years ago. Yes. He put his hands flat on the table. They were steady hands, large and careful, with the kind of steadiness that is not absence of tension, but is tension held very still. She noticed them because she noticed things. Section C, he said. Yes. A pause. I read the file, he said. She waited. He looked at her. Not the composed, arranged look she was used to from him, not the face he showed the world. Something underneath that, something that had been there since the ceremony hall and had been getting harder to keep down. There is a name in that file that I did not expect. She said nothing. The name is your mother's, he said. Silence in the archive. The lamp burned steadily. I know, she said. I did not know, he said. Before tonight, I did not know that the name in that file had any connection to you. He paused. I want you to understand that. She looked at him. He was telling her the truth. She could see it. Not because she trusted him. She did not trust him. She barely knew him. But because she was good at reading documents, and she was equally good at reading faces, and his face right now had the quality of a document with all the editorializing removed. I believe you, she said. He let out a breath. The men who signed that letter, he said, one is dead. One is the father of the man who currently holds the same position. One was my father. She kept her eyes on him. He is also dead, he said. He died 6 years ago. I cannot. He stopped. His jaw had done the thing. There are actions I cannot take against men who are no longer here to answer for them. No, she agreed. But I can change what is currently true, he said. I can change the record. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. Not tonight, she said finally. He nodded. She stood up and put on her coat. But the record can be changed, she said again as she reached the door. Not a question. A test. Yes, he said. It can. She left. She walked upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. The stone in her chest, the one she had carried so long she no longer felt its weight most days, had shifted. Not gone. Not lighter. Just moved. The way stones move in water when the current changes. She looked at the window. The light was on in the opposite wing. She looked at the window. For a long time. Then she said her mother's name out loud, quietly, in the dark of her small palace room, with nobody there to hear it. Sira Voss. She had not said it aloud in 15 years. It fit in the room without breaking anything. She got into bed. She slept. Lord Doran came back. Lena had said he would. She had said it to Kaelin at the table in the archive, in that careful, plain way she had of stating things, not as a warning, not as a prediction, just as the logical conclusion of the information available. Doran had not come to the territorial meeting with one strategy. The survey discrepancy had been the opening. When the opening was closed, he would find another. He came back 11 days after the meeting, without announcement, arriving at the palace in the late afternoon with a small staff and a specific request. A private meeting with the king, not a formal council meeting, not a territorial review. A private meeting, just the two of them, which was either a diplomatic gesture or a trap depending on how you read the man who made it. Salen granted it. Lena only knew this because Lord Fen, crossing the courtyard with a file under his arm, said it to the footman beside him in a voice that assumed no one important was at the nearby archive window. She noted it. She went back to the index. She was in Section F now, the last of her cleared sections, and the work had gotten complicated. Section F contained personal correspondence, letters between the palace and the territorial lord families, formal and informal, going back 60 years. 60 years of letters was a great deal of careful reading. She had been moving slower here, because the content required more attention than the survey records had. She found the second letter about her mother on a Thursday afternoon. This one was not official. It had no seal, no heading, no list of formal signatories. It was a single page in a woman's handwriting, hurried, slightly uneven, the ink different from the rest of the correspondence around it in a way that suggested it had been placed here later, by someone who had found it and needed to put it somewhere. It was undated. The letter was addressed to no one specific. It began, "I am writing this so that what happened will exist somewhere, even if no one ever reads it." Lena read it. She read it twice. She sat with it for a long time. Her mother had written this letter. The handwriting was one she had seen only in small things. Her own name written on the inside cover of a small notebook that she had been given at 6 years old. Her name and a small drawing of a bird. She had kept that notebook. She had the notebook now in her room upstairs. In the bag she had packed with practical things and one impractical thing. The letter described what had happened. Not as a complaint, not as an accusation. Her mother had not been writing a complaint. She had been writing a record. A plain, factual account of the provisional bond that had formed between herself and a man of the court at the fate ceremony, 23 years before Lena was born. The bond had been unusual, strong, immediately clear, witnessed by several people. The man had chosen to reject it the following morning, privately, without ceremony. The rejection had taken, in the ordinary way that rejections take, but the man had then gone to the court and told a different story, that the bond had not been genuine, that Sira had misrepresented her pack status, that she had used improper means to appear at the ceremony. The court had believed him, because courts believe the people they are used to believing. The letter ended with, "They will change the record. I know they will change it. I am writing this down so that the truth exists somewhere, even in the wrong place." Lena put the letter down on the table very carefully. She was a record keeper. She understood, better than most people, what it meant to put something in the wrong place. You put something in the wrong place when you could not put it in the right place. You put it somewhere it might be found, someday, by someone who knew how to read the system. You trusted the archive to do what archives do when they are well kept. They hold things. They do not lose things. They wait. Her mother had trusted the archive. And the archive had been poorly kept for a long time. Misfilings, gaps, deliberate alterations. But here it was. Here was the letter, in Section F, in personal correspondence, in the wrong alphabetical position, but present, found. Lena sat in the archive and let herself feel it. Not the grief. She knew where the grief was and it was not going anywhere, and she was not afraid of it. But the other thing, the small and complicated feeling of being given something she had not known she was missing. The confirmation. The proof that her 7-year-old understanding had been correct. She had been told a story instead of the truth, and the truth had been in the building all along, waiting in a filing system that no one had properly maintained in 12 years. She did not cry. She picked up the letter and carried it, along with the first letter, to the far end of the archive where Section G stood behind its glass panel door. She did not have clearance for Section G. She had never tried to access it. She stood at the door of Section G with 2 letters in her hand and thought about what her mother had written. "I am writing this down so that the truth exists somewhere." She turned around. She went back to her table. She made 2 careful copies of each letter in her own handwriting, noting the date of discovery, the file location, and the archival reference number. She filed the originals correctly in their respective sections. She put the copies in her notebook, between 2 pages of index work so they would not be obvious. She went back to cataloging. That evening, Lord Doran made his move. She did not know this until the following morning, when the kitchen girl who brought the breakfast basket was quieter than usual, and would not quite meet her eyes. Lena asked, directly, what had happened. The kitchen girl said, "The Eastern Lord asked the king for something. We don't know what, but the king did not eat dinner last night and he did not sleep, and this morning he went to the training ground at 4 o'clock and has not come back." Lena thanked her. She sat at her desk for a moment. Then she picked up her coat, went downstairs, crossed the inner courtyard in the sharp morning cold, and went through the east gate toward the training ground. She found him at the edge of the field. He was standing, not running, which told her the worst of it had already happened. Whatever he had needed to burn off, he had burned off, and now he was standing at the tree line in the early light, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who has just found out how much trouble he is in. She stopped a few feet away. He did not turn around. "Doran knows about the bond," he said. "I assumed," she said. "He made a proposal." A pause. "He wants you." She waited. "As evidence," Kalen said, "that the bond is fully dissolved. If I send you to his territory, as a—" He stopped. He tried the word and could not say it. "It would demonstrate, in his logic, that the bond is not real, that I do not value the connection, that he is free to press his territorial claims without the complications of my mating status." She looked at the back of his head. "And what did you say?" she asked. He turned around. His face had the look of something that had been through a long night, not broken, but strained in ways that were visible now when he was not managing what she could see. His eyes were very gray in the early light. He had not shaved. He was wearing the training ground jacket, which had a tear at the left shoulder that she suspected was not new. "I said I would consider it," he said. She held his gaze. "That was a strategy," she said, not an answer. His jaw moved. "Yes. You are stalling." "Yes. Because you have no intention of doing it." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said, "I have no intention of doing it." She breathed. "All right." He looked at her. "That is all you are going to say? What else is there?" She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "You told him you would consider it. That buys a few days. In a few days, with the information now in the index, you will have enough of a counterposition to make his proposal unnecessary. He wants the tributary rights and the boundary agreement corrected in his favor. He does not actually want me. I am a tool in his hand, not a goal. If you give him a better tool, he will use that one instead." He stared at her. "You have read his territorial files," he said. "They are in sections B and C," she said. "Within my clearance. You have been building a counterposition for him since before he arrived." She thought about it. "I have been noting information accurately in an index that you have access to," she said. "What you do with it is your business." He looked at her for a long moment in the cold morning light. "He came to you," Kalen said, "before the meeting. He came to you directly. The stable hand told me." He paused. "What did he say to you?" She had wondered when he would ask. "He told me I had the face of a woman accustomed to being handed to people," she said. The line of Kalen's shoulders changed. She watched it happen. Not the rage, not the dramatic kind, but the colder kind. The kind that settles in and stays. His hands had gone still at his sides. "He is not entirely wrong," she said, keeping her voice level. "I have been handed to people before. I am still here." "What did you say to him?" Kalen asked. "I told him I would give him my answer the following day." "What was your answer?" "I had not decided yet," she said. "When I make a decision, I like to have full information first." He looked at her. "And now," he said, "do you have full information?" She thought of the 2 letters in her notebook. She thought of the index and the gaps and the corrections and the 11 years of misfiled records and the survey discrepancy, and the Fen Creek tributary, and 31 years of accumulated truth sitting in a building that had not been well kept enough to make it findable until now. "Not all of it," she said, "but enough." He was still watching her. "Tell me what you need," he said. And this time it did not come out as a king speaking to a subject. It came out as a man who had run out of his usual language, and was using the only one he had left. She looked at him in the cold morning. She said, "I need you to come with me to the archive." He came. He followed her back through the east gate and across the courtyard and up to the 3rd floor without speaking. She unlocked the archive and lit the lamp and put her coat over the back of her chair. He stood in the doorway for a moment and then came in and sat in his usual chair. She got her notebook. She set the 2 copied letters on the table between them. "Read those," she said. He read them. She watched his face while he read. She had learned his face over these weeks, not intentionally, but in the way that people learn the faces of the people they are around daily, by accumulation. She knew the difference between his composed public face and his thinking face. She knew the small tension that appeared between his eyebrows when he found something in a document that troubled him. She knew the stillness that meant he was deciding something. He set the letters down. "Your mother wrote this," he said. "Yes. The man she describes," he said carefully. "I believe I know who it is. I believe you do as well," she said. Silence. "He is still alive," Kaylin said. "He is still in this territory." She had known this. She had found his name in 2 other documents in Section E, current correspondence, a territorial lord in semi-retirement, who owned a significant stretch of the northern ridge. "Yes," she said. He looked at the letters. She watched him hold this. It was a lot to hold. The man was not his father. Her mother's story and his father's involvement were at a different level. But the man was of his court, his territory, his system. What had been done to her mother had been done with the protection of that system. The false record, the recharacterization, the erasure. All of it had happened because the system had allowed it. His system. She did not say that. She did not need to. "I want you to tell me what you want," he said. "Not what is legally possible or politically convenient. What you want." She thought about it seriously. "I want my mother's name in the record as it should be," she said. "Her correct status, her correct history, the truth of what happened to her, written into the official record where it belongs, where it cannot be changed again, where it will still be there in 30 years when someone else opens this archive." He nodded. "And the man who filed the false reports?" She thought about this longer. "I want him to know that the record has been corrected," she said. "Not punishment, not a consequence. That is for you to determine, not me. But I want him to know that the truth has been written down, that it is here, that it will still be here after he is gone." She paused. "I want the truth to outlast the lie." He looked at her for a long time. "That I can do," he said. She nodded. She picked up her pen. "Then let us figure out how," she said. They worked through the morning. By midday they had a plan. By afternoon it had a timeline. By the time the evening bell rang it had a set of documents, a legal framework drawn from 3 separate provisions of territorial law, and a file that was ready to go to the senior council recorder the following morning. Kaylin had done the legal construction. She had done the documentation audit trail. They had divided it without discussing who would do what. He reached for the law, she reached for the archive, and they met in the middle at the point where the legal argument needed the precise factual foundation that only the records could provide. She noticed at some point in the afternoon that they had stopped leaving space at the table between them. He had moved his chair slightly. She had moved her papers. They were working at the same end of the table now, close enough that she could see the notes he was making in the margin of his legal draft. His handwriting was smaller than she had expected. Precise, slightly tilted. She did not say anything about the handwriting. She went back to the audit trail. At 6 o'clock he set his pen down and looked at what they had built. "It is enough," he said. "More than enough," she said. He looked at her. She was very tired. She had worked through most of the previous night on the survey correction and had not fully recovered. And today had been long in a different way, a heavier kind of long. She was aware of this, the tiredness, in the way she was usually aware of physical things, as information, useful, to be managed. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She thought about it. "Breakfast." He stood, went to the door, said something to the person outside. She had not known there was a person outside, and came back. "Someone is bringing food," he said. She did not argue. She was too tired to argue, and also hungry, which she had been ignoring for several hours. The food came, a tray with bread and 2 kinds of cheese and a small pot of something warm and a covered plate of sliced meat, and Kaylin pushed the legal draft to one side and they ate at the archive table, which was entirely against palace protocol but was also, she suspected, exactly the kind of thing that was going to happen between them from now on. Things that were against protocol, done practically, because the alternative was worse. She ate half a piece of bread before she said, "The thread." He had been pouring something from the small pot. He looked up. "It has been 6 weeks, she said. 60 days is in 2 weeks. He set the pot down. "Yes. The dissolution ceremony," she said. "If that is what you want, we should begin the arrangements." He looked at her. She met his eyes. "I have not decided what I want," he said. The words came out carefully, as if he had arranged them beforehand, and was still not entirely sure of the arrangement. "You should decide," she said, before Doran pushes again. "I know." She took another bite of bread. "I am not going to make this easy for you," she said. "I want you to understand that. If you decide you want the dissolution ceremony, I will go to it and I will say the correct words and that will be the end of it. But I am not going to pretend that the thread does not exist, and I am not going to behave as if what happened to my mother in this palace does not affect how I think about all of this. I am not going to be convenient." He looked at her for a long time. I know, he said again. "Do you?" "Yes." He picked up his cup. "You have not been convenient for a single moment since you arrived." She looked at him. He looked at her. Something moved between them that was not the thread, and was also not entirely separate from it. Something that belonged to the specific, complicated situation of two people who had been in close quarters for 6 weeks, working, discovering each other sideways, across a table in a cold archive with a lamp between them. She looked away first. She ate the rest of her bread. 2 weeks, she said. "Whatever you decide before the 60 days. I would like to know." "You will know," he said. She nodded. They finished eating in silence. She packed up the documents. He took the legal draft. They left the archive together and walked to the corridor junction where their paths split. Hers to the west staircase, his to the south wing. He stopped at the junction. She stopped. He said her name. Just her name. Nothing else. The way he had said it that night in the hallway that she had heard about from the stable hand. Except this time she was there for it. And it landed in the air between them and sat there. She looked at him. He had nothing else to say. She could see that. He had said her name because he had wanted to say something. And that was the only word that came. She thought about the thread, still frayed, still there. She thought about her mother's letter. "I am writing this so that what happened will exist somewhere." "Good night," she said. She walked to the west staircase. She did not look back, but she heard him stand there for a moment before he walked away. That night, for the first time, she dreamed about the fate ceremony. Not the version that had actually happened, not the public rejection and the careful walk to the door. In the dream it was different. In the dream she stood at the back of the hall and felt the thread pull taut, and she looked across the room, and the man who looked back did not say 3 prepared words. He said nothing. He walked toward her and stopped 3 feet away and said nothing, and neither did she, and the thread between them was whole. She woke up before the bell. She lay still for a moment. Then she got up. She got dressed. She went to the archive. She had work to do. The council recorder was a small, precise man named Owen who had been filing documents for the Ashford court for 26 years and who believed, with a conviction that was practically religious, that every piece of paper deserved to be in exactly the right place, with exactly the right notation. He was the only person in the palace who matched Lena's own standards for archival accuracy, and she had identified him in her first week by the quality of his filing in the sections he maintained, which were cleaner than anything else in the building. He came to the archive at 9 in the morning, which was when Kaylin had arranged for him to come. Kaylin was already there. Lena was already there. The documentation was already organized on the table. Owen sat down. He read the file. He read it again. He looked at Kaylin, and then at Lena, and then at the file, and then he said, "This is a formal record correction of a prior administrative action?" "Yes," Kaylin said. "Supported by primary source documentation, including 2 original letters, both verified for authenticity?" "Yes," Lena said. She had verified the letters using comparison documents. Her mother's handwriting from the notebook in her bag matched the letters in the archive at 14 points of comparison. She had documented the verification completely. "And the correction to be entered is a full restoration of the correct historical record, including the reinstatement of the removed pack status and lineage notation?" "Yes," Kaylin said. Owen looked at the file for another moment. He was not someone who showed a great deal of emotion. He had the face of a man who had seen many things in 26 years of court documents, and had trained himself to respond to information rather than to the feelings that information brought with it. But something moved in his face now. Small, barely visible. "It should have been correct from the beginning," he said. "Yes," Kaylin said. "It should have." Owen picked up his pen. He made the entries. It took 45 minutes, because Owen did not rush things that deserved not to be rushed. He entered the correction, cross-referenced it to the original file, noted the evidence basis, marked the previous entry as superseded with the date and the authority, and signed his name at the bottom, with a careful flourish that was the only decoration in his otherwise entirely plain professional handwriting. He put the pen down. He looked at Lena. "Your mother's name is in the record as it should be," he said. "It cannot be altered without a formal council review, which would require a majority of the senior territorial lords and the signature of the Alpha King." She looked at Kalen. He looked at her. "It will not be altered," he said. Owen nodded. He gathered his file copies, stood, and left with the precise, unhurried walk of a man who had just done something that mattered, and was too professional to show how much it mattered to him. The archive was quiet. Lena sat at the table. She had her hands flat on the surface, the way he had put his hands flat on the table in the training ground, not for stability, but as an anchor, a way of being present in a moment that was large enough to be disorienting. Kalen sat across from her. He did not say anything. He had learned, somewhere in the past 6 weeks, that she sometimes needed silence the way other people needed words, and that filling her silences was not a kindness. After a while she said, "Thank you." He said, "It should not have required thanks. It should have already been true." "Yes," she said, "but it was not. And now it is. And you did that." He looked at her. The morning light came through the archive window at a low winter angle, hitting the shelves and the sorted files and the lamp that was not lit because there was enough natural light today. The room looked different in daylight, less intimate than it was in the evenings, more like what it was, a working room, a room that held things, a room that had been keeping the truth in the wrong places for a long time, and had finally been put in order. "The 60 days are up on Friday," he said. "I know," she said. "I have not arranged the dissolution ceremony." She looked at him. "I know that too," she said. He leaned forward, his forearms on the table. This was the closest he had sat to her in daylight, in a room where she could see everything clearly. She could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, which she had noticed in the hall at the ceremony, and which she now knew came from 6 years of being responsible for things that were too large for one person to be responsible for alone. She could see that the tear in the shoulder of his training jacket had been roughly mended, which meant he had mended it himself rather than giving it to the palace seamstress, which told her something about the gap between the public version of him and the private one. "I said things at the ceremony," he said, "in that hall, in front of 200 people. Yes," she said, "and I said them because I had decided to say them before I even walked into the room," he said. "I had decided what you were before I had ever seen your face. I looked at your name on the ceremony rolls, Outer Ward, Omega Born, and I decided." He stopped. His jaw had done the thing. "I want you to know that I am aware of what that was." She waited. "It was cowardice," he said, "dressed up as strategy." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I am not asking you to forgive it," he said. "I am asking you to know that I know what it was." She thought about this. "There is a difference," she said slowly, "between knowing what you did and understanding why it matters. Do you understand why it matters?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You were a person. You were a person standing in a room, and I reduced you to a problem to be solved before you had said a single word." He paused. "And what was done to your mother, in this palace, by my father's court, with my father's signature, it happened because someone else also reduced a person to a problem to be solved. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern." Another pause, and I was about to continue it. She breathed. "You were," she said. "I know." "And the treaty?" she asked. "And Doran? And all the political reasons that made a bad decision look like a sensible one?" "They were real reasons," he said. "They were not good enough." She looked at her hands on the table. She thought about her mother's letter. "I am writing this so that what happened will exist somewhere." She thought about the 7-year-old who had stood in a doorway and been lied to and had not cried, and had gotten up and started figuring out how to live. She thought about the thread, frayed, stubborn, refusing all these weeks to be done with itself. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in this archive, in this palace, because a bond that should have broken had not broken. She had not chosen to be here, but she had chosen, every day since she arrived, to do the work in front of her. She had chosen to file the letters correctly. She had chosen to build the index. She had chosen to tell him about Section C. She had chosen to stay and work through the night on a survey correction that prevented a man from gaining an unfair advantage over a kingdom that had treated her and her mother very badly. She had made those choices because they were the right choices, regardless of what he did or did not do. But she had also made them knowing, on some level that she had not fully admitted to herself until now, that she was not as done with this as she had told herself she was. "Doran," she said, "where does it stand?" He shook his head. We counter-proposed yesterday. Full documentation of the corrected boundary record, the Fen Creek water rights decided by independent survey, and a 10-year cooperation agreement on the eastern trade routes that gives him what he actually wants, without giving him the territorial precedent. He paused. He accepted the framework this morning. She looked at him. He accepted it? He wanted the trade routes, Kalen said. He wanted that more than he wanted the boundary argument. The boundary was leverage. The trade routes are the actual goal. A brief pause. Your index made that clear. Sections B through D. She thought about the 11 gaps, the 4 alterations, and the careful cross-references she had been building for 6 weeks. I was noting information accurately, she said. Yes, he said, you were. They looked at each other. The morning was moving around them, the light shifting as the clouds outside rearranged themselves. From somewhere in the palace below there were sounds of ordinary activity, corridors being cleaned, instructions being given, the muffled sound of a door. The thread, she said. Yes. Friday. Yes. She breathed. If I say I want the dissolution ceremony, you will arrange it. Yes, he said, immediately. And if I say I do not want it? He was very still. Then I would ask, he said carefully, what you do want. She looked at the table, then at him. He was waiting, not in the controlled, composed way he waited for things in public, not the king's patience, which was really just suppressed impatience wearing good clothes. This was the other kind of waiting, the kind that is actually terrifying because it has no armor on. I want you to earn it, she said. Not the bond, not the ceremony, not a legal status. She met his eyes. I want you to earn being the person who is worth a bond. Because right now you are somewhere at the beginning of that. He held her gaze. I know, he said. I am not going to make it easy, she said. I know, he said. I am going to keep working in this archive, she said. And I am going to keep noting things accurately in the index. And I am going to continue to have access to Section G eventually, because the gaps in Section G are directly related to the gaps I have found in Sections A through F, and it would be unprofessional not to close the reference. Something moved in his face. You want access to Section G, he said. I want full access to the archive, she said. It is a professional requirement. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up. He went to the glass panel door of Section G and took a key from his jacket pocket and unlocked it. He came back to the table. He put the key down in front of her. She looked at the key. She looked at him. That is not how you earn it, she said. No, he agreed, but it is a start. She picked up the key. She put it in the pocket of her coat. She picked up her pen. She turned to the next page of the index and wrote the date at the top and noted the extension of the project scope to include Section G, with the date of authorization and the signature she would need from him to make it official. She turned the page toward him. He signed it. She turned it back. She kept working. After a moment, he reached across the table and picked up the legal draft they had been building for the past 2 days, the Doran counter-proposal documentation, and made the amendments needed now that the framework had been accepted. The morning moved forward. They worked. Outside, the winter sky was doing something interesting, gray giving way, in patches, to a thin blue that was not quite spring but was not entirely winter either. The archive window caught some of it, and the light that came in was cleaner than it had been for weeks. Lena noted 3 more entries in the index. She began planning the approach to Section G. The thread was still there, still frayed, still whole enough to feel, still refusing to be done. She was beginning to think it was not going to be done. She did not say this. She kept working. The next days moved differently. She noticed it first in small things. The corridor basin was always refilled in the morning when she came down at 5, which it had not always been before. Someone had started making sure. Her evening tray was delivered a little later than it had been, which meant it was hotter when it arrived. The archive fire, which was usually built up by the time she arrived in the morning and allowed to die by evening, was now maintained later. Someone had changed the instruction to the building staff, quietly, without announcement. She noticed these things and noted them in the private index she kept in her head, the one that was not written anywhere but that she maintained with the same precision she brought to everything else. At the same time, she had begun work in Section G. Section G was not what she had expected. She had expected, based on the gaps she had found in Sections A through F, that Section G would be full of deliberately hidden information, the kind of careful archive manipulation that suggested someone had been tidying things into the dark. And some of that was there, but Section G was also in large part simply old. It contained material that predated the filing system currently in use, material that had been moved here when the archive was reorganized 30 years ago and had never been properly integrated. It was not all hidden. A great deal of it was merely lost, in the way that things in large institutional archives get lost, through the accumulation of small administrative decisions that no one thought to reverse. She found the third letter about her mother on her second day in Section G. This one was not written by her mother. It was written by someone else, a witness, another Omega who had been at the fate ceremony that year, who had seen the bond form, who had watched the events of the following days. She had written it out in careful detail, 2 pages, and sent it to the High Elder at the time. The High Elder had apparently forwarded it to the Palace Archive, where it had been filed in Section G under miscellaneous correspondence 31 years ago, and had not been touched since. A witness letter, a contemporary account, written by someone who had been present. Lena held it for a long time. 3 documents, now. Her mother's 2 letters and this one. 3 voices saying the same true thing in 3 different handwritings, from 3 different angles, about the same event. She took them to Kalen that evening. She knocked on the door of his study, which she had not done before. She had always seen him in the archive, on his territory. He opened it himself, which she had not expected. He was in the ordinary jacket, no crest, and he looked like someone who had been reading before she arrived. She handed him the witness letter without explanation. He read it. She watched his face. He set it down. A witness, he said. Yes. A contemporaneous account. Yes. He looked at the letter, and then at her, and she could see him doing the thing she had seen him do over the past weeks, integrating information, following its logical consequences, arriving at the destination without being told what the destination was. The man who filed the false report is still alive, he said. Yes. This letter, combined with the other 2, is enough for a formal hearing, he said. Not just a record correction, a formal hearing before the senior council. Yes, she said. If you choose to call one. He looked at her. What do you want? He asked. The same question he had asked her before, in the same way. Not as a king asking a subject, but as a person asking a person. She had thought about this. I want what I said before, she said. The truth in the record outlasting the lie. She paused. A formal hearing would make it more visible. It would mean more people know. It would mean the people who knew and said nothing, the ones who are still here, would have to sit in a room and hear it said out loud. He nodded slowly. That is different from what I asked, he said. That is not just the truth in a file. That is the truth in a room. Yes, she said. It is. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him think. A hearing would take time to convene, he said. It would require the senior council, the territorial elder, and a formal petition. He paused. It would also require you to be present, to give a statement. She had known this. I know, she said. Are you? He stopped. Yes, she said. I am. He looked at her. She looked at him. She had come here in a practical coat with practical clothes, and a compass that no longer pointed true, and a notebook with her mother's handwriting inside it. She had come because she had been compelled to come, and she had stayed because the work was real and the thread was not done, and the archive had been poorly maintained for 12 years, and someone needed to fix it. She had done the work. She had fixed the archive, and the archive had given her back what she had not known she was missing. I will file the petition tomorrow, Kalen said. I will sign it myself. She nodded. She went to take the witness letter back and he stopped her, not by touching her, but by putting his hand next to hers on the letter, close enough that she stopped. Leave it, he said. I need it for the petition. She looked at his hand, then at his face. All right, she said. She went back to the archive. She opened the index to a new page and wrote the date and began the Section G inventory, which was going to take a long time, and which she was going to do thoroughly, because there were things in this building that deserved to be found, and she was here, and she was good at finding them. The thread was still there. She had stopped thinking of it as a problem. It was simply part of the landscape now, present, neither frayed nor whole, something in between, something that was waiting the way the archive had been waiting, for the right conditions and the right person to open the right file. She was not in a hurry. She had time. She turned the page and kept going. The formal hearing petition went to the senior council on a Monday. By Tuesday, every person in the palace who paid attention to such things, and most of them paid attention to such things, knew that the king had filed a formal petition for a historical conduct review. By Wednesday, they knew the review concerned events from 31 years ago. By Thursday, they knew the name of the woman at the center of it. Lena knew all of this because it moved through the palace the way everything moved through the palace, not through official channels but through the staff corridors, the kitchen, the service passages between the wings. She heard things. She noted things. She continued working. On Wednesday evening, Lord Fenn knocked on the archive door. He came in and stood for a moment, which was not like him. Fenn was a man who moved through situations efficiently, without the kind of hesitation that meant uncertainty. The hesitation was itself information. "Miss Voss," he said. She put her pen down. "Lord Fenn," she said. He came to the table. He did not sit. He stood with his hands at his sides in a way that suggested he had been thinking about what to say for longer than he usually thought about things. "I am aware that the petition references a document with my father's signature." She waited. "My father is dead," he said. "He has been dead for 17 years. "I know," she said. "I wanted you to know that I did not know," he said, "what he signed, what was done. I joined the court 12 years ago, and I found things in the state they were in, and I maintained them in that state, because I did not look closely enough at how they had gotten there." He stopped. "That is not an excuse. It is what it is." He looked at his hands. "I would like to know if there is anything I can do to contribute to the record being set right." She looked at him. He was a careful man, a professional man, a man who had offered her a permanent position twice in 6 weeks because she was good at her job, which was a straightforward thing. He valued good work, and he saw it, and he said so. She had not trusted him, but she had respected the straightforwardness of it. "Your father filed the documents," she said. "That is a fact in the record, and the record will reflect it accurately. You did not file them. That is also a fact." She paused. "What you can do is make sure that when the formal hearing happens, the documentation I have compiled is presented completely and in order. You have standing in the council that I do not have. Your presence at the hearing and your acknowledgement of the record would carry weight." He nodded. "I will be there," he said. She picked up her pen. "Then that is enough," she said. He left. She went back to Section G. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. The petition required 30 days' notice to the Territorial Council, which meant there was time before it happened. Time that Doran would use if he could. Time that the man who had filed the false report would also have. Kalen had anticipated this. He had moved the survey correction, the boundary record, and the trade route framework into formal ratified status before filing the hearing petition, which meant that the documents were locked before anyone who might want to challenge them had a reason to do so. She was discovering, very good at strategy when he was being honest about what the strategy was for. She found him at the archive table most evenings now, which had stopped being unusual and had simply become a fact of the archive. He came. He worked on his own files. She worked on the index. They talked sometimes about the documents, about the hearing, about the information in Section G, which was turning out to be more significant than either of them had anticipated. They did not talk about the thread. They did not talk about the 60 days that had passed and the dissolution ceremony that had not happened, and the question that was, technically, still open. They did not talk about it, but it was always present, like the lamp, like the cold in the stones, like the sound of the palace settling around them in the evenings when most of the household was quiet. On a Saturday afternoon, Clara came. She arrived at the palace service entrance with a basket, which the gate guard told her was not a permitted method of visiting a palace staff member, and Clara told the gate guard that she had known Lena Voss for 4 years and had outlasted 3 different versions of the Outer Ward administration, and she would like to see her, please, and if that was going to be a problem, she was happy to wait. They let her in. She arrived at the archive door with the basket and knocked and said through the door, "Lena, I have brought you proper tea and 2 kinds of biscuit, and I am not leaving until you eat something that did not come from a palace tray." Lena opened the door. Clara looked at the archive, the shelves, the index, the lamp, the organized stacks, and said, "Good heavens." "It was worse when I arrived," Lena said. Clara set the basket on the table and began unpacking it with the specific efficiency of a woman who had organized many things for many people and was not going to be distracted by the historical significance of the room. She found 2 cups that Lena had in the archive for her own tea and poured from the flask she had brought and set a plate of biscuits between them. "Sit down," she said to Lena, who was still standing. Lena sat. Clara sat across from her. "The whole outer ward is talking," Clara said. "I know," Lena said. "Some of it is kind and some of it is the other kind," Clara said. That is how it always is when someone from the ward does something that gets noticed in the palace. She looked at Lena. How are you? Lena picked up a biscuit. She thought about how she was. She was tired, in the ongoing way of someone doing intensive work over a long period, which was a comfortable kind of tiredness, the kind that came with visible progress, with sections completed and pages filled and things found that deserved to be found. She was also something else, something she did not have a clean word for. Not happy, exactly. Not content. Something more specific than either of those. The feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be, not because everything was finished, but because the work in front of you was the right work and you were the right person for it. I am all right, she said. Clara looked at her in the way that Clara looked at things, directly, without editorializing, but with an attention that missed nothing. The king, she said. Lena ate her biscuit. He filed the petition, she said. I know, Clara said. The whole ward knows. She paused. That is not what I asked. Lena thought about it. It is complicated, she said. Yes, Clara said. I imagine it is. He is. She stopped. She was not used to talking about this. She had not talked about it with anyone, because there was no one she had been ready to talk to. Clara was the closest thing she had to a person she was ready to talk to. He is not the person I thought he was, she said. When I walked out of the hall in the ceremony. The person I walked away from. She paused. He is also not a good person yet, in the way that some people are simply good. He is a person who is trying to become better than what his position and his history have made him. Clara nodded. And you? She asked. I am watching, Lena said. And I am working. And I am not. She stopped again. I am not in a hurry, she said. The bond is still there. I am not pretending it is not. But it is not going to make decisions for me. Clara looked at her for a moment. Your mother would be proud of you, she said. Lena looked at the table. She would probably tell me to be careful, she said. She would, Clara agreed. And then she would tell you to be brave anyway, because that is what she was. They sat with that for a moment. The archive was warm from the fire, and the tea was good, and the biscuits were the kind from the bakery at the south end of the outer ward that Lena had been eating since she was 12 years old. Clara had brought them deliberately. Small things were often not small. The hearing, Clara said. Can outsiders attend? Formal council hearings are open to the public, Lena said. By law. Then I will be there, Clara said. And Greta. Greta has been asking about you. A pause. She said she saw something at the ceremony this year. She would not tell me what. She only said she was not surprised that the record needed correcting. Lena thought about Greta, the elderly Omega in the third row, who had covered her mouth with one hand when the rejection had not taken properly. She saw the thread, Lena said quietly. Clara set down her cup. Ah, she said. Then she definitely will be at the hearing. The afternoon moved through its last hour. Clara packed the basket. She hugged Lena in the way that women who have known each other across years hug, briefly, firmly, without ceremony. She was at the door when she stopped. The king, she said without turning. Does he know yet what you are worth? Lena looked at the index on the table. He is learning, she said. Clara nodded. She left. Lena sat at the table for a little while after she was gone. She thought about her mother. Not the girl in the letter, not the woman erased from the record, but the person she had been before all of it. The person who had sat at whatever table she had and written 2 careful letters about the truth, and trusted them to the archive, and gotten up and kept going. She picked up her pen. She opened the index. She kept going. The hearing was 12 days away now. Kaylin had been doing things she noticed and did not comment on. He had arranged for the senior council recorder Owen to be the official document manager for the hearing. She had requested this without saying she was requesting it, by noting in the index that the documentation chain of custody would benefit from a single experienced archivist, managing it from petition to proceeding. Owen had been assigned within 2 days of that notation. He had come to the archive to go through the full documentation file with her, spending 4 hours on a Thursday afternoon, and he had found one gap she had missed and she had found one categorization error he had made, and they had corrected both, and by the end of it she considered Owen a colleague in the full sense of the word. She had also received, through official channel, notification that her access to Section G had been formally ratified. Not temporary, ratified. It was in the official record of archive access permissions. She had not mentioned it to Kaylin. She was fairly certain he had done it and was not going to mention it either, because that was the kind of thing they had gotten into the habit of doing. A silent exchange of noticed things, done and acknowledged without being said. She found this, to her own surprise, comfortable. Not easy, not simple, but comfortable. The way a well-made chair is comfortable. You notice the quality of the construction only when you stop and think about it, because when it is working well you simply sit in it and do your work. She was not entirely sure what to call what was happening between them. She was fairly sure it did not need a name yet. The hearing was in 12 days. She would deal with the name after the hearing. She turned the page. The days leading to the hearing had a particular quality that she noticed and could not quite name, a tension that was not unpleasant, like the feeling before a storm that you know will pass through cleanly and leave the air better for having moved. Kaylin was in the archive every evening without exception now. On a Tuesday, 4 days before the hearing, he came in and sat, and did not open a file. He sat with his hands on the table and looked at the archive wall until she put her pen down. She waited. "The man who filed the report will be present at the hearing," he said. "He has been formally notified." "I know," she said. Owen had told her. "His name is Gregory Halworth," Kaylin said. "He is 71. He lives on the northern ridge. He has a son and 2 granddaughters." A pause. "He has not responded to the notification in any official capacity. His legal representative contacted the court recorder to confirm his attendance. That is all." She nodded. "You will be in the same room as him," Kaylin said. "I want you to be prepared for that." She looked at him. "I have been in the same room as people who have wronged me before. I survived it." "I know," he said. "I also know that this is different." She thought about it. It was different. The other instances had been minor. A ward official who had spoken to her dismissively for years before she left for the palace. A creditor who had tried to reassign her cottage on a technicality that turned out not to be a technicality when she looked at the actual law. Those had required calm and precision and the ability to hold her ground. This was the man who had helped erase her mother. 67 words in an official letter. A seal pressed into wax. A story substituted for a fact. She was aware that she was angry about it. She had been aware of this for weeks, in the way that you are aware of weather on the other side of a well-insulated wall. Present, real, not going anywhere, held back by something she had built deliberately. "I will be all right," she said. "I know you will be," he said. "That is not the same as being prepared." She looked at him. He looked at her. "When you give your statement," he said, "you do not have to be calm. You do not have to perform composure for the benefit of the council. They are there to hear the truth. The truth includes what was done to you, and what was done to your mother, and that is not a small thing, and you are allowed to say so." She was quiet. "I have been performing composure for most of my life," she said finally. "I know," he said. "It is one of the things you do extremely well." A pause. "It does not have to be the only thing." She looked at her hands. She thought of her mother, who had written 2 letters and trusted the archive. She thought of the 7-year-old girl who had decided not to cry. She thought of what it would feel like, standing in the council chamber in front of the senior lords, in front of Owen with his careful handwriting, in front of Clara and Greta in the public seats, in front of Kaylin on the council bench, and saying her mother's name the way her mother deserved to have her name said. "I will not be calm," she said. "Good," he said. She picked up her pen. She turned the page. She wrote the date at the top of a new section. 4 days. The night before the hearing she could not sleep. This was unusual. She was someone who slept well, not because life had been easy, but because she had always understood that a mind running on poor sleep made poor decisions, and she had needed to make good decisions for a long time. She had trained herself over the years to let go of things at night and pick them up in the morning, and it had served her well. Tonight the training was not working. She lay on the narrow bed in her small palace room and looked at the ceiling and felt the particular wakefulness that is not anxiety exactly, but its quieter cousin, a state of heightened awareness that is not unpleasant but is also not restful. Her mind was moving over the documents she had prepared, the order of the statement she had written, the 3 letters arranged in their archival covers on the table in the archive where Owen would collect them in the morning. She was not afraid of the hearing. She was aware of what it was. It was the right thing, finally, in the right room. It was the truth in a room, instead of the truth in a file. It was her mother's name said out loud, in the kind of official space where said things become permanent. She was not afraid, but she was awake. At midnight she gave up on sleep, got up, dressed and went to the archive. She brought a candle, because the main lamp was not lit at this hour. She set it on the table and sat down and looked at the documents Owen would collect in the morning, and she did not touch them because they were ready, and touching them would accomplish nothing. The archive was quiet in a way it was not quiet during working hours. The palace at midnight had its own sound, smaller, lower, the sound of a large building breathing rather than working. She heard the door open at about 1 in the morning. She did not look up. She already knew. Kalen came in and sat down. He looked at her. She looked at him. They did not say anything for a while. "You also could not sleep," she said finally. "No," he said. She looked at the candle. He put his hands on the table, flat, steady, the way she was used to seeing them. She thought about the morning on the training ground, the torn jacket, the gray light, the moment when he had turned around and his face had been unmanaged and complicated and very tired. "In the morning," she said, "when it is done." "Yes," he said. "I want to go back to the outer ward for a few days," she said. "Afterward, too." She stopped. She did not know exactly what she wanted to do. Breathe, perhaps. Sit in her own cottage with her own things, drink Clara's tea, let the stone in her chest settle into whatever position it would settle into after the hearing had said what it had to say. "Of course," he said, immediately, no hesitation, no calculation. Just, of course. She looked at him. "The archive will still be here," he said. "The index will still be here. Section G will still be here." He paused. "I will still be here." She heard all three of those things as he meant them. "All right," she said. They sat in the archive at 1 in the morning with one candle between them, and neither of them said anything for a long while. And the silence was the easy kind, the kind that does not need to be filled, the kind that has earned its own stillness. At some point she became aware that she was no longer awake in the restless, heightened way she had been when she left her room. Something had settled. The archive, the candle, the presence of another person who was also awake, and also not saying much. It had done what sleep had not. She put her head down on her arms on the table. She did not mean to fall asleep. She fell asleep. In the morning, when she woke to the early light coming through the archive window, there was a blanket over her shoulders that had not been there before. She was alone in the room. On the table, next to her folded hands, was a cup of tea that was still warm. She sat up. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. She drank the tea. Then she got up, straightened her clothes, took the blanket and folded it neatly on the chair, and began preparing for the day. The hearing was at 10 o'clock. She was ready. The council chamber was a room she had never been in before. It was larger than she had expected, not in the way that the ceremony hall was large, which was theatrical, designed to make the space feel significant. The council chamber was large in a functional way, a long rectangular room, plain stone walls, high narrow windows that let in a clear winter light without drama, a raised platform at one end where the senior council members sat, a lower floor where witnesses and the public sat. It felt, more than anything, like a room where decisions were supposed to be made rather than performed. Owen was there when she arrived, arranging the documentation on the table set aside for the official record. He nodded to her when she came in. She nodded back. The documentation was exactly as she had prepared it. She could see the archival covers, the order, the cross-reference index clipped to the front. Clara was in the public seats. Greta was beside her. Greta was a small, ancient woman who had attended fate ceremonies for 50 years and who looked, in the council chamber, exactly as she looked everywhere, like someone who had been watching the world for a very long time and was still not bored by it. She caught Lena's eye across the room and made a small nod that carried more in it than a small nod usually carries. Lord Fenn was at the council table, in his official capacity. He met her eyes briefly and then looked at the documents on Owen's table. Acknowledgement, not much more. She had not expected more. There were 6 other senior council members. She knew some of them from the documents in the archive. Names, their territorial roles, the shape of their interests and their histories. Knowing people through their documents was a particular kind of knowing. You saw what they had decided, what they had agreed to, what they had put their names to. It was not the whole person, but it was a part of them they had never expected anyone to read this carefully. She sat in the witness chair, which was at the edge of the lower floor, facing the council table. At 5 minutes to 10, Kalen came in. He came through the side door, in formal attire, dark jacket with the wolf crest, which she had not seen him wear since the ceremony. He moved to his position at the center of the council table without looking at her, which she understood was correct and professional and not the same as avoiding her. He sat. The chamber settled. At exactly 10 o'clock, the senior council elder, a woman named Bia, who was the oldest member of the council, and who managed formal proceedings with the particular authority of someone who has been managing formal proceedings for 40 years, said, "The hearing is called to order." The matter before the council is a formal review of historical administrative conduct filed under the Records Correction provision of territorial law, petition number 47-6, submitted by the Alpha King 14 days prior. She went through the formal opening, which was required, and which Lena listened to without impatience, because the formality was the point. Every word of the formal opening was a frame around the thing inside it. The frame said, "This is real, this is official, this will be on the record." Then she said, "The council will hear first from the record archivist responsible for the documentation, Miss Voss." Lena stood. She came to the witness position, a small raised circle on the lower floor, facing the council table. The senior counsel looked at her. She looked back. She had written the statement. She had revised it 4 times. The final version was in her coat pocket, and she had read it enough times that she no longer needed the paper, but she had it there as an anchor, the same way her mother had held on to the truth by writing it down. She began to speak. She spoke plainly. She described the discovery of the first letter, the second letter, the witness account. She described the verification process, the methodology, the cross-references. She described the original administrative action in its correct terms, a deliberate alteration of the official record, carried out by 3 named individuals, with the purpose of protecting one person's reputation at the cost of another's. She did not perform composure. When she got to the description of what had been done, the word disgraced, which had been applied to her mother in every official document since that year, the word irregularity, which had been used to describe a bond that had been entirely real and entirely legitimate, she heard the change in her own voice. Not breaking, not the kind of thing that would have embarrassed her, just a fullness to it, a weight that she had not edited out, that she had decided the previous night to leave in. She said her mother's name, not as a reference in a document, not as an archival notation. She said it the way it should have been said 31 years ago, in a room with witnesses, with the full weight of a person who had existed and mattered and had trusted the truth to survive her. Sierra Voss. She heard Greta, in the public seats, make a very small sound. She kept going. She completed the statement. She sat down. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then B said, formally, "The council thanks the archivist for her statement. The official documentation will now be entered into the record." Owen stood. He went through the documents one by one, reading the archival reference numbers into the official record, confirming the chain of custody, confirming the verification methodology. He did this with the specific precision of a man who understood that precision was itself a form of respect for the subject matter. Then B.A. said, "The council will hear from the respondent." Gregory Halworth stood. He was a tall man who had probably been taller once, the kind of tall that years had shortened slightly without entirely taking. He had white hair, very neatly kept, and a face that showed nothing. He had the face of a man who had spent 71 years keeping his face from showing things. He stood at the witness circle. He said, "I acted on the instructions of my superior at the time. I signed the document I was instructed to sign. I am unable to speak to the motivations of those who gave those instructions." He sat down. She looked at him from her seat on the lower floor. He had said almost nothing. He had, in 4 careful sentences, placed himself as a minor actor in someone else's decision, a person following instructions rather than making choices. Bea looked at the council. Any council member wishing to pose a question may do so. Lord Fenn said, "Mr. Halworth, when you signed the document in question, were you present at the fate ceremony in which the bond between the late Sierra Voss and the respondent Alpha was formed?" A pause. "I was present at that ceremony," Halworth said, "in an official capacity." "And did you personally observe the bond form?" A longer pause. "I observed events at that ceremony," Halworth said. "I will ask more directly," Fenn said, and his voice had something in it that she had not heard from him before, a quality she could not quite name except to recognize it as a deliberate choice. "Did you, at that ceremony, witness a real and legitimate provisional bond between Sierra Voss and the Alpha, who later rejected her?" Silence. "Yes," Halworth said. The word went into the room and landed there. B made a notation. Owen made a notation. Halworth sat down. Kalen, at the center of the council table, had not moved during any of this. His hands were flat on the table. He was looking at the space in front of him with the expression she had come to associate with his deepest concentration. Not absence, but internal activity. Everything turned inward and focused. After the final statements, a territorial legal representative who spoke briefly about the scope of record correction provisions, and Owen, again, confirming documentation accuracy, B called the council to deliberate. They deliberated for 24 minutes. Lena sat in the witness area. Clara caught her eye from the public seats. Greta, beside her, had both hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the counsel. When the counsel returned, B read the ruling. The ruling was thorough. It corrected the record, it acknowledged the wrongful administrative action, it reinstated Cira Voss's correct status in full. It formally noted Gregory Hallworth's admission that he had witnessed the legitimate bond formation and subsequently signed a document that misrepresented it. It did not assess criminal liability, that was not within the scope of this hearing, but it did order that a full copy of the ruling be attached to the original administrative file, permanently, as an annex to the corrected record. The ruling would be in the archive by the end of the day. It would be there in 30 years. It would be there in 60. It would be there long after everyone in this room was gone. Bea said. The hearing is concluded. She hit the formal close with a small wooden block, the sound of which was not loud but was extremely definite. The chamber began to move. Clara was out of the public seats before most people had stood. She crossed the floor to Lena with the practical swiftness of someone who has decided a thing and is doing it, and she took Lena's hands in hers without saying anything. Greta came more slowly, leaning on the walking stick she had brought. She stopped in front of Lena and looked at her for a moment. At the ceremony, Lena said quietly. I saw the thread, Greta said, and I saw the rejection not take. She paused. I also knew your mother, not well, but I knew her. She was at 3 of my ceremonies, a long time ago. A pause. She had a very particular laugh, the kind of laugh that made other people laugh without knowing why. Lena could not speak for a moment. I know, she managed. Greta patted her hand. She looked at the council table. Kalen had not come to her. He was still at the table, talking with the senior council member, which was correct. They had official things to conclude. The hearing had been his petition. There were procedural matters. He would not cross the chamber floor in the middle of those conversations to come to her. But he had looked up, over the shoulder of the person he was speaking to, and found her across the room. His eyes met hers for a moment. He held her gaze. Then he went back to the conversation. She breathed. She looked at Clara. I would like to go home, she said. For a few days. Clara squeezed her hands. My cottage, not yours. Yours is cold this time of year, and the fire needs relighting. Mine is warm, and I have good tea, and you can sleep for 12 hours if you need to. Lena looked at her. Yes, she said. Clara nodded. They left the council chamber. Outside, the winter air was cold and clean. The palace courtyard was quiet. The mountains stood in the distance in their usual patient rows. The sky was a pale, clear blue. Lena stopped in the courtyard for a moment. She put her hand against her sternum, against the place where the thread lived. Still there, still frayed, still whole enough to feel. She dropped her hand. She walked out through the east gate with Clara beside her, and the morning was very clear and very cold, and the sky went all the way up. She slept for 11 hours at Clara's cottage. She did not dream about the ceremony or the archive or the council chamber. She dreamed about something ordinary, a garden, plants she did not know the names of, warm afternoon light on stone. She woke up and lay still for a while, listening to the sounds of the outer ward, the street vendor who came through at 7 in the morning, the sound of a child somewhere, the particular creak of the community pump. She was home. Not the cottage that had been her mother's, that cottage was long reassigned, but the ward, the streets, the weight of ordinary life around her. She had spent enough time inside the palace that the outer ward felt both familiar and smaller than she remembered, not diminished, just more clearly what it was. A real place, with real people, where real things happened outside of archives and council chambers, and the complicated business of bonds and kings. Clara made breakfast. They ate at the kitchen table. Clara talked, which was what Clara did, not filling silence nervously, but maintaining a conversation the way you maintain a fire, with the easy confidence of someone who knows the other person does not need to contribute much today, and is comfortable with that. Lena drank 3 cups of tea. She felt the tiredness leaving her in layers. After breakfast she walked. She went through the ward at a pace that had nothing to do with efficiency. She went where the streets took her, looked at the things she had been looking at her whole life, stopped at the South Bakery and bought a piece of bread, and ate it while standing outside in the cold because that was the best way to eat it. At midday she sat on the stone wall at the edge of the ward that looked east, out toward the mountains, the way she had sat on it as a girl when she needed to think without people watching her think. She thought about her mother. Not the letters, not the document, not the administrative action and the false report and the hearing that had put the truth into the official record permanently. She thought about the person, the laugh that Greta had described, the kind that made other people laugh. The handwriting in the notebook that Lena still had, with her name and the small drawing of a bird. The woman who had written 2 letters and trusted the archive and gotten up and kept going and then, at some point, had been gone. And Lena had been 7 years old in an empty cottage, with a man at the door explaining words that meant nothing. She sat with it. She did not try to make it smaller or neater than it was. On the second day, a runner came from the palace. He was not the usual runner. He was older, gray-uniformed, carrying a proper sealed letter rather than a folded note. He delivered it to Clara's cottage with formal courtesy and left without waiting for a response. She opened it. It was short. 3 lines, in Kaylin's handwriting, smaller than expected, precise, slightly tilted. The record is complete. Owen confirms the annex was filed yesterday evening. The ruling is in the archive. Then, below that, in a slightly different ink, like he had paused before writing the rest, there is no rush. The archive will be here when you return. Take the time that it needs. And then, below that, in smaller writing still, there is also a crack in the archive window that I noticed last week. The maintenance staff have looked at it twice and come to no conclusion. I believe it requires the attention of someone who reads buildings the same way she reads documents. She read that part twice. She folded the letter. She looked at the mountains out the window. She smiled. The real kind. The kind she did not perform for anyone. That happened when she was not watching for it. On the 3rd day, she packed her bag. She said goodbye to Clara, who hugged her again, and pressed a small packet of tea into her hands and said, "Come back soon. Bring him next time if that is where things are going. I would like to see for myself." Lena did not say whether that was where things were going. She walked back to the palace. She came in through the east gate. The courtyard was ordinary, guards at their intervals, the dry fountain, the tabby cat in its usual position. She crossed it and went inside and up to the 3rd floor and unlocked the archive door. She came in. She put her bag on her chair. She looked at the room. The shelves were ordered. The index was on the table where she had left it. The Section G door was closed, the key in her coat pocket. The lamp was not lit because it was daytime, and the winter sun was coming through the window at its low, clear angle, hitting the sorted files. In the corner of the window, she had to look twice to see it, was a crack. Thin, almost invisible, running from the upper right corner down about 4 inches. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. She opened the index. She wrote the date at the top of a new page. She began to work. She had been at it for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the door. She did not look up. She heard him come in, pull back the chair on his side of the table, sit down. She heard him take something from the shelf. She could tell by the sound which shelf, which section, and open it on the table. They worked. After a while, she said, without looking up, "The crack is in the upper right corner. It runs about 4 inches. It is not structural. The stone below it is solid, but the seal is gone. In another winter it will be a problem." "Yes," he said. "I thought so." She turned a page. "I will note it in the building record," she said, "and put in a maintenance order with the correct specification. The previous 2 orders were too general. That is why no one could determine what to do with it." "That would be useful," he said. Silence. Pages turning. The afternoon light moved across the shelves. She was back. The archive was the same. The index was where she had left it. The thread was where it had always been. Present, frayed, stubbornly whole. At 4 o'clock she stood and stretched and went to the corridor for water. When she came back, he was standing at the archive window, looking at the crack in the upper corner. He had his hands behind his back, not the formal, composed position, but the thinking position, the one she had learned to recognize. She filled her flask. She looked at his back. She thought about what Clara had said. "Come back soon. Bring him next time." She thought about the 3 letters in the file in Section C, and the annex attached to the ruling that said they would be there forever. She thought about the thread. She thought about a man who had been learning, slowly, the difference between a decision made out of strategy and a decision made out of something true. She said, "Kaylin." He turned. It was the first time she had said his name. Not the title, not the formal address, the name, the one his mother had given him, the one that was on no official document she had ever read. He looked at her. She looked at him. She held out the water flask. He came and took it and drank from it, the ordinary, unthinking act of a person accepting something offered, and handed it back. She put it on the table. She sat down. She picked up her pen. After a moment, he sat down too. They went back to work. The archive was quiet. The crack in the window caught the last of the afternoon light. The thread between them was where it had always been, and it was exactly as frayed as it had been, and it was not going anywhere. Neither were they. Spring came the way it always came to the Ashford territory. Not all at once, but in small, stubborn increments, each one almost imperceptible until you looked back and realized that several weeks had passed and the world had changed while you were not watching it directly. Lena noticed it first in the archive. The morning light shifted. What had been pale and low in January became cleaner, arriving at a slightly higher angle through the window, warming a wider strip of the shelves. She had to move the lamp to a different position on the table. She did this in early February without ceremony, because it was a practical adjustment, and Kalen, who was at his side of the table when she did it, watched her do it and said nothing, and then moved his own paper to accommodate the new light, and that was the end of it. They had developed a language. Not a spoken language exactly, more like the grammar of shared space, the small, wordless negotiations of two people who have been working in the same room long enough to know each other's patterns. She knew that he liked to read standing up when a document was particularly difficult, moving to the shelf to hold it under the better shelf light. He knew that she needed the room quiet when she was working through a gap in the record, the kind of gap that required her to hold 3 different dates in her head simultaneously and test them against each other. He had also started bringing things to the archive without explanation. A better lamp, installed above her primary work position, 2 weeks after she returned from the outer ward. She had not asked for it. She had noted, in the previous weeks, that the lamp placement was suboptimal for the Section G work because of the shelf angle. He had noted that she had noted it. The lamp appeared on a Thursday morning, already installed, as if it had always been there. On a Monday in late February, she found a book on her table that she had not put there. It was a text on historical Wolf Territory records pre-Ashford unification, which was directly relevant to a gap she had been tracking in Section G and which she had referenced in the index as a necessary consultation text 3 weeks before. She had not been able to locate a copy in the Palace Library. She had noted this in the index as a pending research item. The book was old and well handled and had marginalia in several different handwritings from previous readers. She opened it. On the inside cover, in the tight, slightly tilted handwriting she had come to know very well, were 2 words. For the gaps. She left the book on the table. She went back to work. They did not discuss it. Section G was turning out to be an extraordinary archive. She had been working through it methodically for 2 months now, and what she had found was not, as she had originally suspected, primarily a repository for hidden or problematic material. It was something more interesting than that. Section G was the deep archive, the place where the oldest records in the palace's collection had ended up, the material that predated the current filing system by decades, in some cases by more than a century. Some of it had been deliberately obscured, yes, but most of it had simply been placed here and forgotten, because the filing system that governed sections A through F had not been designed to accommodate material this old, and successive archivists had not known what to do with it, and the path of least resistance had been the glass panel door and a polite fiction about clearance levels. What was in Section G, among other things, was the original documentation of the Wolf Territory Consolidation Agreements, the founding documents of the Ashford Territory, written in the handwriting of people who were now historical figures. There were 3 complete correspondence sets between the original territorial lords and the first Ashford king, which she had not seen referenced in any of the current records, and which contained information about the founding agreements that directly contradicted several provisions that had been presented as settled law for the past 100 years. Not all of the contradictions were significant. 2 of them were. She brought these to Kalen on a Wednesday evening in early March, setting the documents on the table between them with the index annotations clipped to the front. He looked at them. He read them. He read them again. He said, "These are original." "Yes," she said. "The provenance is complete," she said. "I have traced the chain of custody back to the original transfer. They were moved to Section G 43 years ago, during the last major archive reorganization. The reason given in the transfer log was document fragility, which is accurate. The paper is old, but the effect was to place them outside the standard access system." He looked at the documents again. "The Eastern Rim water provisions," he said. "The original founding agreement gives joint management rights," she said, "not sole rights to either party. The documents in the main archive reference a secondary agreement that supposedly clarified this, but that secondary agreement is not in sections A through F, and the original is in Section G, and it does not say what the main archive claims it says." He looked at her. "Doran," he said. Doran's family has been making claims based on a document that may have been misrepresented in the official summary, she said. He may not know the originals contradict it, or he may know and be pressing the claim on the assumption that no one will find the originals. Silence. Kalen sat back in his chair. He had the expression she had come to think of as his working face, not the composed public arrangement, but the active, internal face, the one that meant he was following a line of reasoning to its end before he spoke. She waited. If the founding documents are correct, he said, and the secondary agreement summary is inaccurate, then the Fen Creek water rights, the Eastern Rim boundary provisions, and 3 other territorial claims that Doran has made in the past decade are based on a false foundation, she said. And the secondary agreement itself? I have not found it, she said. It may be in Section G, misfiled. It may not exist. I cannot determine which until I have completed the full Section G inventory. He nodded. How long? 3 more weeks, she said. Possibly 4. He picked up the originals, handling them with the careful attention of someone who understood what they were looking at. He examined the seals, the handwriting, the condition of the paper. She watched him do this and recognized, not for the first time, that his relationship to documents was more sophisticated than most people in his position had any reason to develop. He had been reading these files seriously, in the archive, night after night, for months. He had learned things from them that were not in anyone's briefing notes. I need to know about the secondary agreement before Doran's next approach, he said. The summer council is in 4 months. 4 weeks is enough time, she said. He set the originals down. He looked at her. This happened sometimes now, the moment in the evening when the work was finished or paused, and there was a stillness in the room, and they were simply 2 people looking at each other with no document between them. She had stopped being unsettled by it. He said, I spoke with Gregory Halworth's legal representative last week. She waited. He wants to make a formal statement, Kalen said. Not for the record, the hearing is closed and the ruling stands. But he is asking for a meeting with the party most directly affected by the historical events. A pause. You. She looked at the table. She had not expected this. He does not need to, she said. The record is corrected. That is sufficient. I know, Kalen said. He knows. He is asking anyway. She thought about Gregory Halworth, the tall man who had been taller once, the 4 careful sentences that had said almost nothing, the word yes, that he had said in the chamber when Lord Fen asked him directly. What does he want to say? She asked. I don't know, Kalen said. His representative did not say, only that he wants to say it. She was quiet for a moment. Tell him I will think about it, she said. He nodded. He did not push. She had noticed over these months that he had learned to not push. Not because he was not interested, but because he had understood that the things she was working through had their own timeline, and that timeline was hers, not his. She picked up her pen. The founding documents should be photographically recorded before I continue handling them, she said. The paper is fragile at the edges and I have been as careful as possible, but there is a limit to how many times they can be handled without further deterioration. I will arrange it, he said. She turned to the Section G notes she was building. He reached across the table and opened the founding documents again, reading them in the pool of lamplight. They worked. At 7:30 the kitchen staff sent up a tray with no advance notice, as they now routinely did on evenings when the archive lights were still on, 2 portions, which had become the standard. She had stopped being aware of when this had changed. They ate at the table. She was looking at the founding document's water provision clause while she ate, because she was always doing at least 2 things. He was looking out the window. The spring evening was still light at 7:30, a pale blue sky above the courtyard where the fountain had been turned back on with the warmer weather. She could hear it from the archive, a distant, steady sound. My mother's favorite place in the palace, he said, was the courtyard. She used to sit by that fountain in the afternoons when the weather allowed. She looked up. He had said this without preamble, which was new, not the sharing of information, which happened regularly now, but the sharing of something personal and unprompted. She looked at the window. What was she like? She asked. He considered it. Quiet, but not in the way I am quiet. I am quiet because I was trained to hold things back. She was quiet because she was paying attention. She did not miss much. He paused. She would have had opinions about the Section G situation. Good opinions or difficult ones? Both, he said. She had a talent for being both at once. She looked at the window again. The fountain sound came through the closed glass, faint, steady. She died before you became king, she said. Yes, 4 years before. He was quiet for a moment. She would have been frustrated with some of the decisions I made in the early years. She would not have said so directly, but I would have known. Lena thought about a woman who paid attention and did not miss much and had opinions that were both good and difficult at once. She thought about sitting beside a fountain in the afternoon sun. She sounds like someone worth knowing, she said. Yes, he said, she was. They went back to their respective pages. The spring evening outside the window was still and clear, and the fountain made its steady sound, and the archive held its old patient silence around them. She was aware of something settling, not a decision, not yet, but the ground under a decision shifting into a new position. The way the archive floor had its own particular solidity beneath the worn stones, a bedrock that had been there longer than any of the records above it. She turned a page. She kept going. She agreed to meet Gregory Halworth on a Thursday morning in late March. She chose the archive, not the council chamber, not a formal meeting room. The archive, which was her space, on her terms. She chose the morning, when the light was clean and clear, and she was fully awake, and she had already been working for 2 hours. He came at 9 o'clock, escorted by the runner. He came in and looked at the shelves and the index and the lamp and the sorted files, and then he looked at her, sitting on her side of the table. She indicated the chair on the other side. He sat. His representative had not come with him. He had asked to come alone, and she had agreed to that. Because a man who wanted to say something alone was a different situation from a man who wanted to perform something for an audience. He looked at his hands. He was 71 years old, and the hands of a 71-year-old who had lived a full life looked a particular way, marked by time in the same way that documents get marked by time, acquiring a texture that is not damage but is a record. He said, "I have been thinking about what to say for 3 months." She waited. "I have not been able to think of the right words," he said, "so I am going to say the simple ones." He looked at her. "What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I did it anyway because I was afraid of what would happen to me if I refused, and I told myself that I was only a small part of a larger thing and that my refusal would not have changed the outcome." He stopped. "That was also wrong. My refusal might not have changed what happened, but it would have been the right choice, and I made the wrong one." She looked at him. She had prepared for many versions of this conversation. She had prepared for deflection, for rationalization, for the polite performance of regret that means nothing. She had not entirely prepared for this, for words that were simple and did not try to make themselves smaller than what they were. "I know why you did not refuse," she said. He looked at her. "The system was built to make refusal costly," she said. "That does not excuse the choice, but it is true. And the people who built the system, the people who made refusal costly, carry a greater part of the weight than the people who were afraid inside it." She paused. "You signed the document, you are accountable for that, but you did not design the structure that made it possible." He was very still. "You are being more generous than I deserve," he said. "I am being accurate," she said. "Generosity and accuracy are not the same thing." He nodded slowly. "Your mother," he said. She waited. "I was at the ceremony," he said. "I saw the bond form. It was real. Anyone in that room who was paying attention could see it was real. She was not. She had done nothing irregular. She was simply not the person they wanted him to have chosen." He stopped. She accepted it with more dignity than most people have in a crisis. She did not make a scene. She did not argue. She went home, and she was quiet about it. A long pause. And then we made sure that her quiet would be read as guilt rather than grace. Lena looked at the table. "I know," she said. "I found the letter she wrote." He nodded. He said, "She had a very particular laugh." Lena looked up. He was looking at the shelf behind her, at the middle distance, at something that was not in the room. "She laughed at a joke someone told at the edge of the ceremony ground," he said, "before it started, before any of it. And it was the kind of laugh that made everyone within hearing distance feel, for a moment, like whatever had just been said was genuinely the most delightful thing." He paused. "I thought about that laugh many times after." She had to be still for a moment. Greta had said the same words, the kind of laugh that made other people laugh. The same image, from 2 different memories, neither of them hers. Her mother, standing at the edge of a ceremony ground, laughing at a joke before anything had gone wrong. She let herself have that. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me that." He nodded. They sat in the archive for a few more minutes. She did not need anything else from him. She had what she had come for. Not absolution, not a reversal, not the return of what had been taken. Those things were not possible. But the truth, again, the truth from another angle. Her mother, laughing, before the ceremony started. He stood. He said, "I hope what is in this building was worth finding." She looked at the shelves. "Most of it," she said, "and the rest is in order now." He left. She sat at the table for a while. Then she picked up her pen. She opened the index. She wrote the date at the top of a fresh page and began the day's work. By the following week she had completed the Section G inventory. It ran to 42 pages in the index, 42 pages of material that had been present in this building for decades without being properly documented. She found, in the final shelf, a copy of the secondary agreement. It was not what the main archive summary had claimed it was. The founding documents were correct. She brought the full file to Kalen on a Sunday afternoon. He sat with it for 2 hours. She went back to the index. At the end of the 2 hours, he set the file on the table between them. "The Summer Council," he said. "Yes," she said. "Doran will be there." "Yes." "He will not be expecting the original founding documents." "No," she said. "He will not." Kalen looked at the file. "You built this in 4 months," he said. She considered it. "The material was here. I found it." "You found everything that had been here for 100 years and lost," he said. He paused. "I do not think the word found is quite large enough." She looked at the index. 42 pages. 11 gaps resolved, 4 deliberate alterations documented, 3 letters recovered, 1 ruling filed permanently, 1 founding document set restored to the official record. And the archive window cracked now in the building log with a proper specification, which the maintenance staff had fixed last week and which she had noted with a brief satisfying entry. "Resolved, seal repaired, no further deterioration." "The word is accurate enough," she said. She closed the index. She put down her pen. She looked at him. He looked at her. "The Summer Council is in 3 months," she said. "Yes. The archive project is complete," she said. "The cataloging, the index, Section G, all of it." She paused. That was the scope of the original position. He was very still. "Yes," he said. "Lord Fenn has asked me twice about a permanent position," she said. "I know," he said. "He asked me as well." She looked at the shelves. "The archive needs a proper archivist," she said, "not a temporary one. Someone with full access and full authority to maintain the record accurately and completely." "Yes," he said. "It does." She looked back at him. "That would mean staying," she said. He met her eyes. "Yes," he said, "it would." Silence. The spring evening light was gold in the archive window. The fountain in the courtyard made its steady sound. The shelves held their ordered contents, finally whole, finally documented, finally in the right places. "The thread," she said. "Still there," he said. "Still frayed," she said. "Still there," he said again. She thought about what it meant to choose something, not because you had to, not because a bond had formed that refused to break and made the choice inevitable, but because you had looked at a situation clearly and understood what it was and decided, with full knowledge of the cost and the complication and the work still ahead, that it was worth it. She had made choices like that before. She was good at it. She said, "I will take the permanent position." He breathed. She picked up her pen. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me," he said, immediately, without hesitation. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. She wrote them down. He leaned forward. He read them as she wrote. By the time she had finished, he had said yes to 4 of them and was arguing, carefully and with full attention, about the 5th, which concerned the scope of the archive access provisions, and which she had written slightly more broadly than was strictly necessary, because she had learned, by now, that he engaged better when there was something to push back against. They argued it. She held her position. He modified his objection. She modified the condition. They met in the middle, which was where they usually met. She added the final version to the page. She signed her name at the bottom. She handed it across the table. He read it once more. He signed it. She took it back. She put it in the notebook. She closed the notebook. Outside, the fountain made its sound, and the spring evening held, and the archive was very quiet around them in the particular way it was quiet when everything in it was in the right place. She had work to do. She got on with it. The Summer Council convened in the second week of June. 12 territorial lords, the senior council, the palace advisors, and 2 visiting delegates from the northern independent territories gathered in the East Hall, which had been set up for a 3-day formal session. Lena was not in the hall. She was in the archive, doing her job, which was the job she had been doing since the spring and which did not stop for councils or political events or any other kind of business. She had prepared the documentation that would be used in the hall, the founding documents, carefully photographed and sealed in archival covers, with a full provenance chain and cross-reference index. She had briefed Owen on the material, because Owen would be managing the official record of the proceedings, and needed to understand what he was handling. Owen had, over the course of these months, become a colleague in the fullest sense. They communicated in the shorthand of people who think about the same things in compatible ways, and she trusted his precision completely. She heard about the council proceedings the way she heard about most things that happened in the palace, through the movement of people in the corridors, the sound of voices at different pitches at different times of day, and the specific updates that Kalen gave her in the evenings when he came to the archive. He came to the archive on the first evening of the council, looking like a man who had spent 10 hours being very careful in a room full of people who were also being very careful, and who was grateful to be in a room where careful was a different kind of thing. He sat down. He said nothing for a moment. She put her pen down. "Lord Doran," she said. "He raised the Eastern boundary provisions in the first session," Kalen said, "before lunch. He had prepared documentation, secondary agreement summary, territorial survey, the boundary claims he has been building for 8 years. And the founding documents?" Owen presented them in the afternoon session. A pause. Doran was not expecting them. She had known he would not be. What did he say? Nothing immediately. He asked for a recess. Kalen leaned back. He spent the recess with his legal representative. He came back and asked for a full review of the founding documents' provenance. "Owen has the full provenance chain," she said. He presented it, completely. It took 40 minutes. A very brief pause that had something in it she recognized as quiet satisfaction. Doran's representative confirmed the chain was unimpeachable. She said nothing. "The Eastern boundary provisions will be reviewed under the original founding agreement terms," Kalen said, "not the secondary summary. The review will take several months. The outcome is not certain." He paused, "but the foundation of the claims has changed completely." She picked up her pen. "Good," she said. He watched her. "You are not surprised," he said. "No," she said. "The documents say what they say. I read them correctly. You presented them. The outcome follows from the evidence." He looked at her for a moment. "Other people might feel some satisfaction at being right," he said. She thought about it. "I feel satisfied that the documents are being read accurately," she said. "That is not a small thing." He almost smiled. She had gotten better at reading the almost smile, the slight shift at the corner of his mouth, the change in the line around his eyes. "No," he said. "It is not a small thing." He picked up the file he had brought and opened it on his side of the table. They worked. On the second day of the council, something else happened. She heard about it at 4 in the afternoon, when Lord Fenn appeared at the archive door with the expression she had now learned to associate with the good kind of news, rather than the complicated kind, a specific brightness in an otherwise always managed face. He said, "Lord Arden of the Western Ridge has proposed a formal reconciliation provision." She looked up. "Between the palace and the outer ward Omega-born community," Fenn said, specifically addressing historical administrative misclassifications. She set her pen down very carefully. Fenn said, "It is a proposal, not a ruling. It would require ratification from multiple council members and formal consultation with the community." He paused. "The Alpha King has expressed full support for the provision. He would like your assessment of the historical documentation scope, specifically what the archive holds regarding previous administrative misclassifications." She looked at the shelves. She had found, in sections B through G, over the course of 4 months, 11 separate instances of Omega-born pack status misclassification in the official record. Her mother's was the most recent. The oldest went back 60 years. She said, "Tell Lord Arden that I will prepare a documentation summary by tomorrow morning." Fenn nodded. He left. She opened the index. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, pulling the relevant cross-references and building the documentation summary, a clear, factual account of what the archive held, what the gaps in the record implied, and what a formal reconciliation provision would need to address to be comprehensive. Kalen came in at 7 o'clock. He found her at the table with 10 different files open around her, the lamp positioned at the best angle, her second sweater on, her ink uncapped. He sat down. He looked at the files. "You found all of these," he said. They were in the archive, she said. You found all of them, he said again. She kept writing. Lord Arden's proposal, she said. It will need community consultation. Real consultation, not the kind that is called consultation and is actually notification. Yes, he said. I intend to make that clear. Clara would be the right person to lead the community side, she said. She has been in the ward for 30 years. She knows everyone. They trust her. I will pass that recommendation through Fen, he said. She turned a page. She kept writing. At 9 o'clock she set down the pen and looked at what she had built. 12 pages. Clean, clear, precisely referenced. Everything the archive held, everything that bore on the question, in the right order with the right context. She assembled the pages. She would give them to Owen in the morning. She looked at the window. It was dark outside, fully dark, the summer dark that came later than the winter dark and was a different quality, warmer, not coldstone dark but sky dark, with the sound of the courtyard fountain coming through the glass. She said, Kaelin. He looked up. What Lord Arden proposed today, she said. Did you ask him to? He met her eyes. I raised the topic with him 3 weeks ago, he said. I did not tell him what to propose. I told him what the archive had found and what I believed needed to be addressed. He paused. He agreed. He chose to propose it. That was his choice. She looked at the documentation summary on the table. 3 weeks ago, she said. Yes. The week after I completed the Section G inventory, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about the conditions she had written in the notebook. She thought about the signature at the bottom. She thought about the signed copy that she kept in the notebook, and the copy he had kept. Where he kept it she did not know, but she knew he had kept it. She thought about a man learning, slowly, the difference between a decision that serves what he is and a decision that serves what he is becoming. She said, Thank you. He said, It needed to be done. Yes, she said. It did. She stood and put on her coat. And you did it. He looked at her. She picked up the documentation summary. She was at the door when she stopped. She turned back. She said, When the council ends and Arden's proposal goes to formal ratification, there will be a period of community consultation. Several months, probably. Clara will need support from the palace side. Someone who can speak for the council's genuine intent, not just its official position. She paused. Will you come to the ward yourself? Not in formal capacity. Just come. He was very still. Yes, he said. If that is what would be useful. It is what would be real, she said. Useful comes from real. She left. She went upstairs to her room, which was no longer quite her room. It was her room, in the way that a space becomes your own after you have been in it long enough, put your things in it, had enough early mornings and late nights in it for it to have a texture. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the window. Across the courtyard, the light was on in the opposite wing. It had been on most nights, this spring and summer. She had long since stopped noting it as something separate. It was simply part of the view from the window, the way the mountains were part of the view, or the fountain, or the cat on the fountain's edge. She lay back. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the thread. It was still frayed, still there, still the same thing it had been in January, when she had stood on the cold stone steps after the ceremony and put her hand against her sternum, and found it not gone. But it was not exactly the same. Something had changed in the fraying. The individual threads that made it up, whatever the threads were made of, she did not have the right language for it, were different, not healing, not the way a wound heals by simply closing, more like a rope being repaired strand by strand, with new material that was not identical to the old material but was as strong or stronger. She did not know when that had started. She thought it was probably around the time she had said his name. She thought about the conditions in the notebook. She thought about the argument over the fifth provision, which had lasted 45 minutes, and which she had eventually given approximately 70% of, which she considered a fair outcome given that his objection had been partially reasonable. She thought about the book on her table with 2 words on the inside cover. She thought about the blanket over her shoulders, on the night before the hearing, in the archive, when she had not meant to fall asleep. She thought about the tea, still warm. She closed her eyes. She breathed. In the morning she would give Owen the documentation summary. The council would continue. Lord Arden's proposal would move through its formal process. The archive would be where it was, in order, complete, tended. She would be in it. He would come in the evenings. They would work. She was not in a hurry. She had never been in a hurry. Not really. She had always understood that the things worth having took the time they took, and that patience was not the same as waiting. patience was the decision to be fully present in the time before the thing was finished. She was fully present. She fell asleep. The consultation period lasted 4 months. Clara ran it, as Lena had suggested, with the particular efficiency of someone who knew every person in the ward by name and who understood, better than any palace official could have, what real consultation looked like. She organized 8 meetings. She collected written statements. She compiled a community record of historical misclassifications, corroborating the archive's 11 documented cases, and adding 9 more that the archive did not hold, which Lena then traced and found, in most cases, in Section G under misfiled material. Kalen came to the ward 3 times. Not in formal capacity. No advance announcement, no official reception. He came with 1 advisor and no guard, which was not strictly within palace protocol, and which Lord Fen had apparently said something about, because Kalen had apparently then said something back to Lord Fen that had ended the conversation. He sat at the community table in Clara's meeting room. He listened. He did not make speeches. He answered questions directly when they were asked. When he did not know an answer, he said so and then found out and came back with the answer. Lena watched this from the side of the room. She did not guide the conversations. She was not there in any official capacity. She was there the way she had always been in the ward, as a person who belonged there, who was listening. She was also watching Kalen do the things she had told him would be real rather than just useful, and finding that he was better at it than she had expected. Not natural. Not comfortable exactly. He was a man who had grown up in institutions, in formal structures, in the measured language of power, and sitting in a community meeting room, and being questioned by a 40-year-old woman who kept goats and had strong opinions about water rights was not his usual environment. But he stayed. And he listened. And when the goat-keeping woman asked him, directly, whether he had known what the palace records contained about her grandmother's case, he said, "No, I did not know. And I am telling you that knowing it now does not undo what happened, but changes what happens from here. And you should hold me to that." She held him to it. So did Clara. So did everyone else in the room. Lena watched him hold steady under it. On the walk back to the palace after the 3rd meeting, she was beside him. Not close, just beside, the way 2 people walk together when they are used to each other's pace. The ward streets were quiet in the late afternoon. The South Bakery was still open. She could smell it. He said, "That was harder than the Eastern Lords." "Yes," she said. "The Eastern Lords are arguing about land," he said. "That is comprehensible to me. I know the shape of that argument. I know the tools." A pause. "The ward is arguing about whether you mean it," she said. "Yes," he said. She said, "Do you?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She looked at the bakery. She said, "Come with me." She went to the bakery and bought 2 pieces of bread and handed him one and kept walking. He ate the bread while walking, which was not the kind of thing you did when you were being a king, and she noticed that he did not hesitate about it. They walked back to the palace in the autumn afternoon, eating bread from the South Bakery, and she thought that this was as ordinary and as extraordinary a thing as she had done in a long while. At the east gate she stopped. He stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "At the ceremony. In January." He was very still. "You came across a room full of people," she said, "and you said my name and my lineage in 3 words, before you knew anything about me." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "And you had decided, before you walked into the room, that you would do that." "Yes," he said. "I had." "Why did you say my name first?" She said. "Most rejections are spoken to the room, not to the person. You said my name before you said the words." He was quiet for a moment. She had wondered about this for months. She had not asked it. "Because I was looking at you," he said. "And you were looking at me, and I could not say it to the room when I was looking at you." A pause, which is not an excuse. It is only, that is what happened. She thought about this. She said, "I am going to ask you something." "Yes," he said. "And you should answer honestly, not strategically." "Yes," he said again. He had the unmanaged face, the complicated, tired, very present face. She said, "Do you want to complete the bond?" Silence. The east gate was behind him and the courtyard was beyond it, and the fountain was making its steady sound and the mountains were doing what the mountains always did, which was stand there. He said, "Yes." 1 word. Simple. No preamble. No calculation, just the word, said directly, looking at her. She had known. She had known for a while. But knowing a thing and hearing it said were different, and she had needed to hear it said plainly. She said, "I know." He looked at her. She said, "I need more time." "All right," he said, immediately. "Not because I am uncertain," she said. "I am not uncertain. I am—" She thought about it. "I am making sure that when I say yes, I am saying it for the right reasons. Not because a thread pulled, not because circumstances made it the easiest path, not because I am already in your palace and the practical difficulties of not saying yes are larger than the practical difficulties of saying it." She paused. "I want to say it because I choose it, fully." He held her gaze. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "Yes," he said. "I have been learning what it means to choose things for the right reasons. I am still learning." A pause. "I can wait while you finish." She breathed. "All right," she said. She went through the east gate. She went back to the archive. She lit the lamp. She opened the index. She wrote the date. She worked. The fate ceremony came around again. Lena had been at Ashford Keep for almost exactly 1 year when the ceremony night arrived. The same low orange moon, the same cold end of the cold season, the same candles in the great hall. She had not forgotten what had happened the last time she stood in that hall. She did not think she would ever forget it, but she was also aware that she was a different person from the woman who had stood near the back pillar by the candle smoke and told herself nothing would happen this year. That woman had been right that something would happen. She had been wrong about almost everything else. She was not in the hall this time. She was in the archive. This was deliberate. She had not been commanded to attend, and she was palace staff now, permanent, contracted, with 5 specific conditions written in a notebook and signed by both parties. And palace staff had different obligations than ward residents during the fate ceremony. She was on duty. Or she had said she was on duty. She was actually sitting at the archive table with the index open and the lamp lit and the window showing the orange moon hanging over the inner courtyard, and she was not particularly working. And she knew she was not particularly working. And she was being honest with herself about all of it. Clara was at the ceremony. Greta was at the ceremony. Most of the outer ward was at the ceremony. She was in the archive. She had been thinking. She had been thinking since the East Gate, since the bread from the South Bakery, since the word yes said simply without strategy. She had been thinking through the autumn and into the early cold, and what she had found, at the end of the thinking, was what she had suspected she would find when she started. Not a decision she had arrived at, but a decision she had already made, and was waiting to be ready to say. She was ready. She heard the door. She did not look up. He came in. He was in ordinary clothes, not the formal jacket, which meant he had not attended the ceremony in official capacity either, which she noted without commenting on. He sat down. She said, without looking up, "How long have you been out of the hall?" "About an hour," he said. She turned a page. "The ceremony is 3 hours," she said. "Yes," he said. "You left early." "I did." She looked at the index page in front of her. She had been reading the same 3 lines for 20 minutes. She put the pen down. She looked at him. He looked at her. The archive was quiet. The moon was orange in the window. The lamp was burning steadily between them, and outside the fountain was not running because the cold season had turned it off again, and the palace was full of the ceremony's distant music, which came through the stone walls as a very soft, unidentifiable sound. She said, "I have been doing the thinking I said I needed to do." He said nothing. He waited. She said, "I have been asking myself whether I am choosing this for the right reasons. Whether I would choose it if the circumstances were different, if we had met somewhere else, some ordinary way, without the ceremony and the rejection and the archive and all of it." He was very still. She said, "I think I would. I think the person you are, not the king, not the title, not the position. I think the person who comes to the archive in an ordinary jacket and reads documents seriously, and signed 5 conditions in a notebook and sat in Clara's meeting room and listened. I think I would have chosen that person." She paused. "I also think that it is impossible to fully separate the circumstances from the choice, and that trying to find a version of the choice that is completely unaffected by what happened is looking for something that does not exist," she said. "We are what has happened to us, and what we did with it, and who we became because of it." She looked at the lamp. "The archive is who I am. The record-keeping, the gaps, the corrections, the finding of things that were lost." She looked back at him. "You came to the archive. That matters." He said, "Yes." She breathed. She said, "I want to complete the bond." She said it the way she said everything important, plainly, without softening, in the same clear voice she used for archive notations and council records and the documentation of true things. He looked at her. The almost smile was not an almost smile. It was a real one. She had not seen that before. The complete version, with the lines at the corners of his eyes that came from 6 years of being responsible for too much. But in this configuration they meant something different. It was the face of a man whose wolf had been lying down in the middle of a training field for months, waiting, and had just been given permission to stand up. He said, "Yes." She said, "There are conditions." He said, "There are always conditions." She said, "These are different from the notebook ones." "Tell me," he said. She told him. There were 4. The first was that the community reconciliation provision would be fully ratified and formally implemented before the completion ceremony. Not started, not in process, but done. She would not complete a bond into a system that had not done that work, regardless of how much the system had already moved. He said, "Yes," without hesitation. The second was that the archive's independence would be formally codified. She would not answer to any court official for the content of her findings, only for the professional standards of her work. What she found in the archive would be documented accurately regardless of who it implicated or how it complicated the palace's current position. He said, "Yes," and this time he reached across the table and opened the notebook and turned to a fresh page, which told her something. The third was that she would keep her room in the outer ward, not to live in. She had not lived there for a year, but as a room that was hers, that she could go to, that remained her own. She did not want to become entirely the palace. He said, "Yes," and wrote it down himself. The fourth condition was smaller than the others, or it seemed smaller. She had thought about whether to include it, because it was personal rather than structural, and the other 3 were structural. She included it. She said, "I want you to tell me about your mother, not what she was like in general terms, the specific things, the particular things you remember." He looked at her. She said, "I have 3 letters and a notebook and a description of a laugh. I want to know what she was like. You knew her. Tell me about her." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him. He said, "She grew mint in a window box in her private rooms. The palace staff said it was informal for a queen, and she said that mint was not informal, it was practical, and she used it in tea every morning of her life." He paused. She read very fast, and she was slightly competitive about it. She did not like to be the second person to know something. She would finish a report and then immediately find someone who had not read it yet, so she could discuss it before they had. Lena looked at him. He said, "She used to win arguments with my father by simply outlasting him. He was formidable in the first 2 hours of a disagreement. She was formidable in the third." He said, "She had a specific sound she made when someone said something she thought was untrue. Not a correction, not a rebuttal. Just a small sound that made the person want to immediately reconsider their statement." He said, "She would have known what you were the moment she met you. She would not have said anything. She would have given you the window seat in whatever room she was in, and asked if you wanted tea, and watched to see what you did when you thought no one was watching." He paused. "She would have approved of you." Lena breathed. She said, "All right." She held out her hand for the notebook. He gave it to her. She wrote the 4th condition. She added, "Agreed." She signed her name. She handed it back. He signed. He put the notebook on the table between them. They sat in the archive in the orange moonlight with the lamp between them and the palace sounds around them, the distant ceremony music from the great hall, the settled quiet of the stones. She said, "The ceremony for completion, the high elder prentice, the formal words." "I will arrange it," he said. "After the reconciliation provision is ratified," she said. "Yes," he said. "After." She looked at the notebook. She looked at the shelves. She looked at the window. She thought about the ceremony last year, the hall, the thread pulling taut across the room, the 3 words she had said on her way to the door, the walk home, the tea, the decision not to cry. She thought about 11 months of archive work, of gaps found and corrected, of letters recovered, of a record set right. She thought about the founding documents and the Doran negotiations and the reconciliation provision. She thought about bread from the South Bakery and a blanket over her shoulders and a cup of tea still warm. She thought about her mother's laugh, the kind that made other people laugh. She thought about the thread, still frayed, still there, something new in the material it was made of. She thought about the word chosen. She said, "I would like to keep working now, if you do not mind." He almost smiled. "I will get my files," he said. He reached to the shelf behind him. She picked up her pen. She wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. She kept the record. The orange moon moved across the window as the night continued. The lamp burned steady, The archive held its contents in order. The corrected things, the recovered things, the things that had been lost and found and placed back in the right positions. Outside, in the great hall, the ceremony continued. Hundreds of wolves, waiting for a thread to pull, for the deep animal part of themselves to recognize something. In the archive, the thread was already there, already chosen. Strand by strand, it had been repaired with new material, until it was stronger than it had been before it frayed. It would not sever. It had never been going to sever. The wolf in Kaelin Ashford had known this in January, on the training ground, in the moment it lay down in the frost-brown grass and refused to move. The wolf had been right. It usually was. Lena turned to the next page of the index. The moon hung over the mountains in the cold, clear sky, orange and steady, the same moon it had always been, over the same mountains, over the same kingdom, over an archive that was finally in order. She wrote another line. She kept the record. The record kept them both. The reconciliation provision was ratified on the 15th of February. The vote passed with 11 of the 12 senior council members in favor. The 12th abstained, which was noted in the record and which Owen entered with the same careful precision he brought to everything, because precision was itself a form of honesty, and the record deserved honest accounting even of the incomplete votes. Lena was not in the council chamber for the vote. She was in the archive. She heard about the result when Kaelin came through the door at 4 in the afternoon, moving with the particular energy of a man who had been holding something back for a long time, and was now not holding it anymore. He said, "It passed." She looked up from the page she was on. She said, "Good." He stood in the doorway. She put her pen down. She said, "Clara's name should be in the provision document as a formal community representative." It was her work. He said, "It is already there." Owen added it. She breathed. She said, "All right." He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "I suppose we should arrange the ceremony." He said, "High Elder Prentice, the East Hall. Tomorrow morning if you are willing." She thought about it. "Not the East Hall," she said. He waited. She said, "Here." He looked at the archive, the shelves, the index, the 2 tables, the lamp, the repaired window with its clean winter light, the Section G door standing open the way it always stood open now. "Here," he said. "This is where—" She stopped. She was not usually someone who had difficulty finding words. She looked at the room. "This is where the things that needed to be true became true," she said. "It seems right." He said, "Yes." She said, "Tomorrow morning. Prentice, Clara, Greta, Owen." A pause. "Lord Fenn, if he wants to be there." He said, "He will want to be there." She nodded. She picked up her pen. She said, "Then I will finish this section tonight, and be ready in the morning." He came in. He sat down. He reached for his files. They worked through the evening, through the archive's particular evening quiet, with the lamp between them and the winter dark outside the window and the palace sounds around them. She finished the section at 8:43. She noted it in the index. She capped the ink. She folded the index closed. She looked at the shelves, the ordered shelves, the corrected record, the things in their right places. She said, "I used to think the archive was the opposite of living, that working with old records meant turning your back on what was happening now." He looked at her. She said, "I know now that the archive is how living gets to persist. The things that are true and documented and placed correctly in the record, they do not go away. They are still there when someone needs to find them." She looked at the window. "My mother wrote 2 letters and trusted the archive. She was right to." He said, "Yes." She said, "I am glad the archive was poorly kept when I arrived." He looked at her. She said, "If it had been well kept, there would have been nothing to find." He understood her. He said, "And you would not have been here." She said, "And I would not have been here." She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She said, "Good night." He said, "Good night." She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the window. The light was on in the opposite wing. She looked at it. She thought about the first night she had been in this room, when she had noted the light and turned away from it and told herself she was not going to think about Kaelin Ashford or the thread or any of it. She had been very thorough in her not thinking. She was less thorough now. She lay back. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about tomorrow morning. She thought about High Elder Prentice, who had been speaking the formal words at ceremonies for 40 years and who was, she suspected, going to be entirely unsurprised to be asked to perform one in an archive. She thought about the formal words, which she knew, because every wolf knew the completion words the same way they knew the rejection words. You learned them both at the same time, because both were part of the same truth about what bonds were and how they worked, and what it meant to say yes or no to them, with full knowledge of what you were saying. She had said no, once. She was going to say yes in the morning. She thought about whether she was ready. She was, she decided, as ready as she was ever going to be, which was not the same as not nervous, not the same as not aware of the weight of it, but ready, in the way that she was ready for big things, not without feeling, but with feeling, and also with the full knowledge of what she was doing and why. She put her hand against her sternum. The thread. Still frayed, still whole enough to feel, still there. She thought, in the morning. She closed her eyes. She slept. In the morning she woke before the bell and dressed carefully, not in anything ceremonial because she was not that kind of person, but in her best ordinary things. She looked at herself in the small mirror and decided she looked like herself, which was the right thing to look like. She went down to the archive at 7. Owen was already there, having come early to arrange the documentation. Clara arrived at 7:15, in her good coat, with Greta beside her who was in her ceremony clothes and looked magnificent. Lord Fenn arrived at 7:30 and stood at the side of the room with the expression of a man who was allowing himself to feel something that he usually kept on a shorter leash. High Elder Prentice came at 7:45. He was older than she had thought, up close. Small and ancient and very alert, with eyes that had been watching ceremonies for so long that they seemed to look at things in a different way from ordinary eyes. Not more or less, just differently, as if they were also looking at the thing behind the thing. He looked at the archive. He said, "In 41 years this is the first time I have performed a completion in a room full of books." She said, "The books are the right witness." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Yes, I think they are." Kalen arrived at 8 o'clock. He came through the door in his ordinary jacket, no crest, no formal attire, the same jacket he always wore in the archive, with the sleeve that had been mended at the shoulder by what she now understood was definitely his own stitching. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. Clara made no sound, which was more expressive than any sound Clara could have made. Greta folded her hands. Owen opened his notebook. Prentice said, "Shall we begin?" They began. The formal words of completion were not long. They were, like the words of rejection, simple, designed to be said clearly and remembered, not designed to be ornate or impressive. 3 statements from each person, which together made the bond formally whole in the eyes of pack law and pack history, and the specific, deep animal knowledge that lived in every wolf beneath their thinking self. She said her 3 statements. He said his 3. At the moment the last word was spoken, the thread did not explode into something dramatic. It did not blaze or break or do anything that would have made a good story. It simply completed. The fraying resolved. The strands settled into place. The thing that had been pulled too hard at both ends and loosened without breaking had become, without announcement, what it had always been working toward. Whole. She breathed. He breathed. Greta made the small sound she had made in the ceremony hall a year ago, except this time it was a different kind of small sound entirely. Clara said, "Well?" Lord Fenn, at the side of the room, did not say anything. He looked at the shelves. Owen wrote the completion date in his notebook with the careful handwriting that respected serious things. Prentice closed his ceremony book. He said, "The record should note the location." Lena said, "The Palace Archive, 3rd floor, West Wing, Ashford Keep. It is already in the building log." He nodded. He said, "Then it is complete." It was. She looked at Kalen. He looked at her. She said, quietly enough that it was only for him, "There is still work to do." He said, "There is always work to do." She said, "Good." She turned to the table. She uncapped the ink. She opened the index to a fresh page. She wrote the date. She kept the record. Behind her, the shelves stood ordered in the winter light, holding the things that were true, the corrected things, the recovered things, the lost things found and placed correctly, the letters that had waited, the founding documents that had been sitting in the wrong place for a century, the 11 gaps, all resolved, the mother's name in the official record, in the right place, permanent. The wolf in Kalen Ashford raised its head. It looked at the room. It looked at her. It bowed. Not in submission, not in defeat. In the deep, old language of wolves who recognize what they are looking at and choose it, fully and without reservation, for the first time. The archive held. The record kept. The orange moon would come again in a year, over the same mountains, and the ceremony would go on as it always did, And somewhere in the building the archive would be there, tended and true, doing what archives do when they are well kept. They hold things. They do not lose things. They wait for the right person to open the right file. And the truth, put down in ink, in the right place, outlasts everything else. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was the whole story, and the whole story was true. And it was written in the record where it would still be found, long after everyone in this room had gone, by whoever came next with a lamp and a pen, and the particular patience to read what had been left for them.